Prince Rudolph, branded a selfish tyrant and born of a mistress, suddenly discovers he's got a real claim to the throne. And that makes him the perfect target as a blinding light pours from a wound no one can see. He snaps his gaze to the attacker, not terrified, just baffled. In his hand, a gilded dagger gleams, and yet he doesn't fight back. He only stares and demands to know. The truth hits you the moment blood starts flying. He doesn't even fight back, because he already knows how his own future plays out. But it all kicks off hours earlier at the Scorpio Palace, the fourth prince's home inside the Baldyke Empire. The atmosphere feels razor thin. Two palace staff members huddled close, whispering over a grim crisis. It's been 7 days since Prince Rudolph got poisoned, and trust me, things are only getting worse. Just a few steps away, two maids trapped the conversation in their ears. One murmured coldly that it'd be great if the prince just died, and the other snapped back in a whisper, shutting her down. The hush shatters when the prince's chamber door slams open, and they rush in to find Prince Rudolph sitting upright in bed, wide awake. After 7 days of sleep, he's back. A maid snaps into action, shoves Maya to fetch the physician right now. As word of his awakening rips through the palace like wildfire, the prince rolls his eyes at all the chaos, then calmly tells Maya, the worried staff, and the physician rushing in that he won't die, so they can stop panicking. The doctor drops to his knees and starts examining the prince right away, who sits calmly on his bed like nothing's wrong, while the rest of the staff hovers back at a distance, faces twisted between shock and dread. The physician grills him for his name and age, and the boy answers with nerves of steel, Rudolph First Baldyke, I'm 14. Then when they press his history, he doesn't flinch. He's the fourth prince of the Baldyke Empire, the emperor's own son. He delivers a brutally chilling verdict on his own life. His mother was a commoner dragged in to give the imperial family a child, and everyone's siblings, relatives, even the court hates him for being born from a mistress, so they poisoned him, and the staff listening in terror can't even hold it together, begging him to stop. He perched on the edge of his bed while the physician and servants finally slipped out, and once the doctor saw nothing urgent, he told him to keep resting. Then the whole staff sent him off with heartfelt hopes that he'd bounce back fast. Once they vanished, he stood alone in that huge, quiet room, staring straight at the floor, silent and locked in thought. His mind wasn't on him, it was on the servants, because he knew they weren't there to wait on him at all. They were there to watch every move and rush back to their real masters to spill everything. He knew exactly who those masters were, his own brothers and the queen, and to them, he wasn't anything but a miserable nuisance. Meanwhile, down a palace corridor, two maids strode side by side, their whispers drifting straight to the prince. Maya even leaned in to ask her senior if she too felt something was off about Prince Rudolph. Her companion's troubled face basically screamed that she was right, yet he stayed unnervingly calm, like he hadn't almost died. And the senior maid's worry matched it as she murmured that with so many palace spies flying around, nobody could ever truly know what was going on behind his eye. They kept going, whispering that the prince was choking on fear and anxiety. No allies, nothing to stop an assassination at any moment, and while everyone speculated, right behind his bed curtains, the prince trembled in silence. But inside that room, his trembling wasn't fear. It was defiance, staring at his own reflection in a basin of water. Tears poured down his face as he made a silent vow he would not die, because he knew with absolute certainty that he'd live for at least another 10 years. This conviction was built on an impossible truth. He wasn't guessing the future. He'd walked out of it 300 years ahead, to be exact, and he somehow remembered every brutal detail of this era's history. Right when his life hung by a thread and poison dragged him toward death, the memories slammed back into his mind, everything from his past life. Like a flash of lightning, he suddenly snapped back to the life he had before remembering he'd originally been born a plain village kid in some quiet rural town, way down the road from this current era. After dying as just an ordinary man, his soul got yanked through time and space, then slammed into a brand new life as the fourth prince, Rudolph I Baldyke. Before his memories came back, everything about him as the prince was brutal rage first. No kindness, like a hopeless tyrant, he'd fly into a tantrum over what he hated, even carrots, then scream, curse, and shove cruel, totally unreasonable demands onto his poor servants. That hit him like a punch, pure disgust for how stupid he used to be, because now he finally realized the person he was before his memories came back was the absolute worst kind of human. He sank into his chair, shoulders hunched, silent as he wrestled with how to live from this moment on. Then, outside the window behind him, a cloaked figure suddenly appeared. Rudolph's thoughts snapped in half when the assassin smashed through the glass dagger blazing as the intruder lunged, but Rudolph moved faster than anyone expected, diving aside to dodge that first deadly swipe. Pinning the prince to the floor, the assassin froze. Rudolph wasn't fighting back, and he definitely wasn't trembling. "Why aren't you scared?" the attacker demanded, then shoved the question aside, lifted the dagger high, and ordered His Highness to brace for impact. Just as the assassin lunged to strike, an arrow slammed through the air and buried itself in his shoulder. And then, from the doorway, the guard dropped to one knee with his bow still raised, while the senior barked orders to drive the attacker away from the prince. The wounded attacker spit out a curse, knew he'd failed, and bolted back through the shattered window. The guard snapped that he was running and reached to chase until the senior maid slammed in front of him, swearing the prince's safety came first. Now that the danger was finally gone, the senior bolted to Rudolph's side and demanded to know if he was okay. Then she waved everyone off as well. Rudolph stayed calm, told them he needed to think, and ordered them to clear out after they cleaned up the glass shard. He jolted upright in bed, relief crashing through him like a wave. He was saved, sweat dripping down his temple as he realized the book's info looked real. But the knife still haunted him because the assassin had truly meant to kill. That book was the Wilhelm War record, his beloved epic poem from his past life. And now it was a brutal history write-up of what happened 300 years ago. The poison attempt, the assassination he'd just barely survived. Even knowing it was coming, he never wanted to live through that nightmare again. With that knowledge locked in his bones, he was sure the attack wouldn't kill him. Then the book flipped the script and promised a fate he couldn't dodge. His eyes drifted up to the night sky as the war record's grim details slammed back into his head, how every attempt on his life would poison his trust until suspicion hardened into a cold decision to wipe out all of his brothers. A choice that would circle back to kill him too, about 10 years later, when he was just 25. The book laid out how history would brand him as Emperor Rudolph the Cruel Tyrant, with a cruelty no one had ever seen, while he clutched his head, shaking, because if the story kept rolling exactly like it said, the nonstop fear and suspicion would tear his mind apart and push him straight into becoming that monster. He'd be tossed aside with no one caring, no one needing him, and the only thing waiting at the end would be pure suffering, him cursing the world that left him behind. But then flames ripped through his chest. He shot up, refused that fate with everything he had, and basically spat, "To hell with it." He wasn't dying that day. He'd live, fight, and survive. And with those future memories burned into his mind, he knew he could rewrite history itself. Fueled by fresh resolve, he strode to the nearby chest of drawers and snatched a tiny ornate box from inside. He cracked it open, and there it was, one lone coin shining back at him. He cupped it in his palm, and his mind immediately snapped to that special girl, tied to a promise waiting for tomorrow. It was all part of his plan first. He had to sniff out his enemies, then strike them down, and finally wipe every last rotten problem out from within the palace walls. He knew exactly where to start his purge first. He went straight for the ledger. He immediately yanked his staff into his grip and snapped to the senior maid, telling her his work had been thrown off by his recent sickness, and now he needed her to fetch the ledger from the Scorpio Palace. The maid froze in stunned silence, and while Maya watched, worry gnawed at her chest, her thoughts spinning, because for a prince to suddenly demand that ledger was totally out of character, and she couldn't stop asking herself what had gone wrong. Prince Rudolph leans into his senior maid, Tapel, and tells her, "I'll be turning 15 soon," forcing himself to swallow the guilt as he apologizes for dragging so much work onto her all this time. She flashes a soft, worried look and tells him he's probably wiped out from that assassination attempt, then insists he should drop the chores and let the rest of the staff handle them. Russia's offer was right there. He said he was totally fine, but he needed her to bring the ledger to him. PayPal leans in and reassures him they're hunting the assassin for real, pushing every ounce of Imperial Palace prestige behind the search, then promises they'll land the culprit and tells him to finally get some rest. The prince snaps that the assassin wasn't some random hit. One of his brothers likely ordered it, and he's sure this investigation will just grab the first scapegoat it can find. He shuts that thought down fast and demands the ledger again. Right as he's about to speak again, Tapple yanks him into a crushing, desperate hug, and in the background, Maya freezes, shocked by the burst of emotion. Tears slash down her face as she sobs, cursing the fact that His Highness has finally swallowed the brutal truth he and his brothers were always meant to tear each other apart. She leans back just long enough to meet his gaze, and suddenly it hits him. She's been his personal maid since he was born, even wiping and changing his diapers for his mother, and now she pledges her loyalty without a single crack, swearing on the brooch pinned to her uniform. Right in front of him, Tapple swears, no matter the dangers ahead, she'll stand by his side through everything. Then she begs Prince Rudolph to trust her, but when he looks down, his eyes vanish into shadow. At that exact moment, a terrifying truth slams into him. Tapple, the one quietly stuffing her pockets behind the scenes. Her devoted smile flips into a wicked, greedy grin, and the prince's eyes flare wide with stunned realization. He digs up those old war records, and every page shows Mrs. Tapple loyally standing by his side right there with the so-called cruel emperor. Then it hits him. This venomous woman who twists his name to pull off her lavish schemes would turn wicked even when the world is calm. He flashes fake sincerity, snatches her hands, and thanks her while his brain screams. Then he pushes for the ledger, and her awful acting gives him everything he needs. She's guilty. He locks eyes with the woman in front of him, and in that instant, he makes his choice. If he wants his life to stay calm, Mrs. Tapple has to go. She knows he won't let her sweep her crimes under the rug, and even if he's thrilled she trusts him, he's got one thing on his mind to bring her down. He'll need solid, undeniable proof. With the decision made, he declares he's eating first, then orders her to bring dinner, and be ready to explain every word in that ledger he doesn't understand. She stammers, blushes, panics at the spot, and darts off in a fluster. He's done chewing, wipes his mouth, and figures Tapple is probably scrambling to erase the evidence. Then a brutal crash rips the air, and he sees Maya, the younger maid, sprawled by a shattered water jug, explaining that the handle snapped because it was ancient. He laughs it off, blaming the ancient furniture in his room for all the chaos and saying everything feels totally worn out. Maya smiles and jumps right in, agreeing with him. Her smile dies the second it hits the room. She drops to the floor, prostrates herself, and blurts out nonstop apologies, swearing she'll fix it right now. Rudolph freezes, stunned by her shaking panic, and tells her to stop. But the truth lands like a gut punch. He's become something terrifying to the very people he leads. She scrambles off in a rush, mumbling about tracking down a rag to close the distance, and Rudolph shouts after her, demanding her name. He flashes a gentle smile and repeats her name, like he's double-checking it's real Maya. I watch the maid's face light up with relief. Then she blurts it back one last time, flustered and breathless. His mind snaps back to the chaos he cut through just moments ago. He still wants answers. Back in his memory, the staff were scrambling in pure panic while the senior barked orders to double-check the ledger before his walk was finished, and he remembers his own impatient glare, demanding, "How long am I supposed to wait?" In the present day, he stands in his study, facing his flustered staff, and blurts that he's done waiting. "So what are they doing?" The senior steps up and insists she's been double-checking the ledger, line by line, to make sure it's spotless for his inspection. Then, with no warning, he snatches the book right out of her hands. He starts flipping through the pages at first. He's forced to admit they nailed it. The money looks perfectly balanced and steady until the longer he checks, the tighter his eyes get, because the senior's confident claims start to crumble the moment he spots something that stops him cold. While the prince and the senior maid are stuck in the dark, two other servants crowd right outside the door, huddled together and glued to every sound. One of them hisses for silence, practically vibrating with excitement for what's about to explode because inside, Rudolph is gearing up to fire his question. He jabs a finger at the ledger entry, then fires off the question, why did they burn through that kind of money to furnish the place? The senior maid just sweats harder, and with a trembling voice she says, "Your Highness, it's a palace." She flings her arms wide, sweeping across the huge study, and tells him straight up that the emperor himself handed this Scorpio palace to him, then presses him with one sharp question, what does he think is the most important part of that duty? She stands there like she owns the room, lifts one finger, and declares the answer herself, pure, unshakable dignity. The prince keeps blurting confused, and the senior maid rushes in to explain if anything messes with the imperial family's dignity, it gets tossed and replaced, yet somehow there's always so much furniture that needs swapping that the budget never covers it. Rudolph won't let it go, pressing her until he gets the truth, so they're constantly trading old pieces for new ones. While they spar back and forth, the servants outside practically swarm the door, leaning in so hard they can barely hold their breath to catch every word. His eyes rake across the study-worn chairs, a battered old desk, and then he snaps back toward the staff, voice razor sharp. "So tell me," he demands, "why is all this furniture so old?" The question slams into the room and the staff freeze, wordless. That accusation shatters senior maid Tapple into stammering chaos, her thoughts sprinting in a panic because, yeah, it's true, not just this room, but the whole palace is stuffed with battered, worn-out furniture. From the hallways to the fixtures, dignity is completely gone. He calmly slides over another ledger and asks if she recognizes it, then points out how it looks exactly like the one she gave him, until he spots the weird part this time. Half the budget is still untouched. He cradled the book right up to her face, spoke in a low, cutting voice, and declared her ledger fake. Then, that accusation hit Tapple like a punch, stealing her breath as she fought to believe it. Her calm shatters in an instant. She and her accomplices crumple to the floor, stunned as she snaps, "Who gave him the real ledger?" With her voice shaking, Maya pushes out from the doorway and says, cool as ice, "It was me." The prince nods, confirming she tracked down the ledger for him. Then the steward erupts in shock, yelling that it can't be, swearing the ledger Maya found must be the fake one. She shuts down his denial on the spot and slaps the document onto the table with pride scrolled over in the official seal of Scorpio Palace Prince Rudolph, then drives the nail home, saying only he can produce that seal, so forging it is out of the question. The proof is laid out, and the whole room goes dead quiet. Table breaks into a cold sweat as the truth hits like a hammer. It's over. His judgment lands. In the second it does, he flicks a small star-shaped object with a subtle gesture. Instant chaos. 2 armed guards burst into the room, already poised to obey. The guards sprint in and snatch the senior maid and the steward right away. As ropes bite down and he's pinned, the steward begs the prince for a pause. Rudolph cuts through it all, barking that they're to be taken away. As they're hauled out, their alliance splinters into vicious accusations. Tapple gets branded a traitor by the steward, who swears she dragged him into the whole scheme, and Tapple snaps back, screaming that he blackmailed her into it. The prince stands there staring at the wreckage, his face impossible to read. Tapple, the senior maid, snaps on him, launching a blazing tirade, shouting that after 15 years of loyal service, he should have had compassion for one mistake, and roaring that he won't die a good death. Her desperate screams ricochet down the hall, but the prince stays stone calm, then slowly lifts his eyes to lock onto hers. A guard clamps onto her, and Tapple thrashes against the iron grip, groaning, pleading, begging to be freed. Her fight crumbles in an instant. She drops to her knees in front of him, choking out apologies, and begs for mercy as she finally reveals who poisoned him and who hired the assassin. As Stuart drops onto the floor with her, both of them beg for mercy with everything they have got, while the other staff members just stare in stunned silence. He stares down at her, voice slicing cold as he demands to know if she really understands who sent the assassin. Then his eyes flare, and he snaps that it was her. Tapple. He lays it all bare. Those repeated assassination attempts were a trap to make him doubt everyone, so he'd have no choice but to trust her after he butchered his own brothers to seize the throne and become emperor. She keeps talking, insisting she brewed the poison on purpose and planned the assassination to be survivable. The whole scheme was to trap him, twist his mind into doubting everyone around him until he had no choice but to lean on her. And when Tapple hears it, accusation hits like a hammer. He erupts into a piercing scream of denial. With the conspirators finally swept away, the prince snaps back to the palace business. He squares up to the remaining staff and orders a full ledger check, warning them there could be more fraud lurking in the shadows. His words hit the servants like lightning. Instantly they blurt, "We're swamped," then scramble back to their duties, faces packed with full-on panic and frantic, overworked, "We're on it," pride. He watches them disappear, a calm rush of satisfaction settling in, and he tells himself that once this new precedent's set, the days of fraud are going to get cut down hard. He collapses. Then the hard, stern mask he's been wearing cracks wide open, making the prince admit to himself that what he did was terrifying and he just can't keep pretending anymore. He whips around to Maya, true gratitude blazing in his eyes as he thanks her for saving his life, and declares his tyrannical act over, while the maid, stunned, speechless, can only squeak out a shaky, "You're welcome," her face caught between total confusion and real concern. Then he drops a shocking bombshell. He appoints her as his personal maid, and Maya freezes, totally stunned, wondering if he's actually expecting to be served. He snaps a warning to her about the brutal road ahead because the other servants, loyal to Tapple, will probably brand her a traitor the second she steps in. Still, Maya drops into a deep bow, thanking Prince Rudolph, and Vowan swears she'll give everything she's got in her new role. The prince drags his memories back from the shadows, replaying the moment he turned into a cruel emperor, like a truth snapping into place. It wasn't fate. It was loneliness carving him into that monster, with no trustworthy allies to steady his hand. This time he vows everything will be different. He'll bend history just to stay alive, and he needs to lock in real trustworthy allies. A massive estate looms under a blazing blue sky, and leaves spin through the air on a lazy breeze, like the world is holding its breath. In its sprawling gardens, a figure attacks the hedges with sharp, nonstop snips from their shears. A bandage-wrapped gardener halts mid-labor and stares through the leaves, watching Prince Rudolph slump alone in a nearby gazebo, lost in thought about how desperately he needs more allies. His mind snaps into one jaw-dropping conclusion. First, he'll need a fiancé. Right then, a young noblewoman and her maid stride into the garden. She stops to admire the flowers, spots the prince, and blurts, "Prince Rudolph." Rudolph freezes like he's been hit in the chest. She froze in pure shock as the young woman introduced herself with total formality. "I'm Lisbeth," she said, "the eldest daughter of the Farkrent family." Then immediately her words lit up the room. Being chosen as his fiancé was an honor so massive it felt unreal. Two figures sat across from each other at a tiny table, while the air hung heavy and silent as dark birds streaked past the palace's towering columns. As he stared at the shadowed lines of her face, one killer thought slammed into his mind: this girl was an absolute no. Know it, because that thought snapped into a terrifying premonition, and the image of total destruction tore through his mind. If you were to marry her, his eyes snapped back to the present. Lisbeth stood there with a bouquet of pale white flowers, and their sweet scent hit the air. Then the horrifying truth slammed into him like a death sentence. He was going to be killed. Murder still hung in the air when Prince Rudolph finally laid eyes on a young woman with beauty that didn't belong on earth. Her jet black hair shone like onyx, and her bright blue eyes flickered like aquamarine, but to him, she was anything but welcome. He slid into the seat across from her at a tiny table, and the air practically crackled with things nobody dared say, because for Rudolph, sitting across from this woman only meant one fate: death, sealed and unstoppable. He knew it for sure because his home country's future was waiting for him 300 years ahead, and he'd already seen it in his beloved book from that time, a massive epic poem that worshipped a hero named Wilhelm. They said he'd grow up to rule as the terrifying emperor, then fate ripped him away young when her blade struck. The epic even revealed this: Wilhelm and Lisbeth Farkrens, his Frostvale maiden, were head over heels, and their love ignited the moment he slipped on the special brooch she sent. After that wild, intense affair, they swore they'd love each other forever. Then someone else showed up and ripped their whole relationship to shred. And the one who stepped in, the one who tore the fated lovers apart, was none other than Rudolph himself. Then just like that, their love snapped in two, drowned in grief and despair, and Lisbeth slammed her heart shut all over again. The heartbreak finally exploded into a terrifying spray of blood. So it was decreed that the cruel Emperor Rudolph had finally died, killing the Baldike Empire with him, and later Wilhelm rose up and built the Sauvelier Kingdom. Back in the present, Rudolph shot a grimace across his face. The facts didn't even matter. One truth hit him hard: marrying her was a disaster waiting to happen. He just stared into his teacup, and his resolve snapped into place because he valued his own life too much to mess with the destined romance between them. Rage and worry churned inside him, and Lisbeth clocked it at once. His face had gone pale. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Right as he tried to speak, His maid Maya cut in fast, saying he was just thrilled about dinner and hadn't slept a wink. Rudolph opened his mouth to deny it, but all that came out were shaky stammers. She kept pushing to fix it, murmuring to the prince that she got his nerves, then pointing out softly but firmly that his tea was turning cold. His thoughts skittered like sparks. He had to kick off the conversation himself. If he botched an emperor-made deal, it would be a full-on insult. So he gritted his teeth and searched for a gentle way to get Lisbeth to call off the engagement. Then, forcing himself to breathe, he took one slow sip of tea. He finally looked her straight in the eye and said he figured she was thrown off by how suddenly the engagement was brought up, then quickly added that everyone's got their own situation, and he sincerely hoped he hadn't put her out. She thanked him for those kind words and admitted she was totally blindsided the moment she first heard the news. Then she called the whole arrangement an overwhelming honor, and it hit Rudolph like a punch to the gut. His face snapped into panic as he finally understood one terrifying thing. She didn't see it as an inconvenience at all. Desperation clawed at him, but he pushed forward anyway because he couldn't shake the feeling that she never wanted to be engaged to someone like him. He figured she was only showing up because the emperor ordered it, and especially since she already had Wilhelm. So he snapped to one conclusion: her father needed to refuse the engagement. He went straight to her and begged, wrapping it up as a favor because that engagement was too big an honor for him. So he pleaded with her to be the one to turn down the offer. Her answer was blunt, and it hit like a thunderclap. Not at all. Rudolph's whole plan crumbled on the spot, and he just went totally silent, utterly crushed. He chews on her words, and suddenly it clicks. She isn't just saying no, she's daring him to level up. Now he gets it. She'll need a real reason, a rock-solid stepping stone before she can turn down that engagement. A small grin breaks across his face as he accepts the challenge. Armed with this new clarity, he finally steps up, introduces himself the right way, and kicks off his first move, 1,000 lions. He launches into a grand, show-stopping speech, declaring himself the fourth prince, the most gifted genius the Baldyke Empire has ever seen, then brags that nobody can outmatch him in academics or swordsmanship, and claims the entire Scorpio Palace worships and adores him, no matter the gender. Internally, the blatant lies hit him like a gut punch. Tears threaten his eyes. He's convinced this loud, pretentious nonsense would crush any sane person's spirit and make them slam the brakes on the engagement. His whole plan blows up on the spot when his maid Maya suddenly pops up behind him and scares the life out of him. And then, no hesitation, she enthusiastically backs his story, telling Lisbeth that Prince Rudolph is truly wonderful, that he crushed the palace corruption, and that he even saved her after she got accused of being a traitor. Her misplaced support detonates panic in the room, and he quietly pleads with Maya to read the vibe because the lie isn't landing. So he snaps and knows he has to change his whole approach. He throws his first strategy aside and declares it's time for the truth. He's got something huge to tell her, so he kicks off his second planned threat. He tells them, "Yeah, I'm fourth in line, but I'm still in the running," and that alone makes him a target for assassins. Then he recounts how his maid poisoned him, he slipped into a coma, and the second he woke up, death tried to strike again. He's dead certain that if she marries him, she'll get dragged straight into hellish danger, and he insists that's reason enough for her to shut down the engagement for good. Lisbeth listens in dead silence, her face impossible to read. Then she calmly asks if something's wrong, reminding him that the Farcramp bloodline has been hailed for ages as the Empire's military emblem, and that she trains with a spear herself, leaving Rudolph completely floored. She speaks in this calm, ice-cold tone and says showing fear over just potential assassins would stain her family's name, and Prince Rudolph across from her can't even find a word. He's completely stunned. Panic slams him as he realizes the plan just crashed. Now he has to cook up an even stronger excuse to make her step back. While he's scrambling for a new plan, Lisbeth cuts through his thoughts and asks would he share a few stories from his childhood. He's totally blindsided by her request, and he immediately fires back, grilling her about her motives only to shut her down with a cold reply. He doesn't have any childhood memories worth telling. Still, the words he speaks yank him straight into a sunlit field. Lisbeth, younger than ever, sitting across from him, grateful for saving her and pressing a tiny token of her gratitude into his hand. That token was just one lonely coin, but when the haze cleared and the present snapped back in, he realized he still had it, and he vowed to keep that secret locked inside his own head, because it was only his. His sudden silence jolts Lisbeth into calling his name, yanking him out of his reverie. He stammers out of shock, confirming that, yes, she really had asked him to share stories from his youth. A sinister thought flashes through his mind. He knows his childhood stories are notorious among the nobility, and he's sure she's trying to lure him into spilling them just to enjoy the show. He pictures her cracking jokes about his humiliating past with hero Wilhelm, then decides he'll take up the gauntlet because if she wants a show, he'll make sure she gets one. His foot keeps drumming on the floor in a ruthless rhythm, and he leans in close, urging her to dive into the story he's about to unleash. He kicks off his story by calling it the idiotic, ridiculous, miserable comedy of his whole life. He lays it all out since he's an illegitimate kid and the son of one of the emperor's mistresses. He never should have been allowed anywhere near the throne. Still, his mother threw everything she had at the emperor, pleading so desperately that she finally won, and Rudolph was named the fourth prince. He remembers asking his mom ages ago why he was ever born, and Lisbeth jumps in right away saying she must have done it out of pure care for his future. Rudolph's memories slam him with the cold truth his mother flat out told him she needed it to become part of the imperial family, and that gut-punch revelation leaves his younger self reeling, stunned. He blurts it out to a stunned Maya. He's just the insurance policy so his mother can keep living in luxury, even if she ditches him. Yet the moment a new mistress tries to show up, she can't strut around as the prince's mother in public, and the nobles and royal crowd, they're not buying it for a second. That simmering resentment turned into raw cruelty, like those noble women whipping their fans to strike the young prince. Once he got hit, he'd crash to the floor and sit there alone in a cruel spotlight, while the courtroom buzzed with whispers and nonstop gossip about him. No matter what he tried, crushing it with swordsmanship, burying himself in study, shouting for others, or begging for help, nobody would even so much as glance his way. Everyone acted like he didn't exist, including his own biological father, the emperor, and even his mother, who hugged the emperor tight, while their son was left standing there, ignored. He lays it all out. This is exactly why he started doing things they couldn't possibly ignore. He'd smash stuff on a whim, spiral into full tantrums, and spit curses at anyone nearby. Then violence would snap to life in him over the tiniest annoyances. He'd hand servants impossible chores, punish them when they failed, and grin while they suffered, because that's exactly how the tyrant prince was forged. Through all that chaos, with the court staring in pure horror and disgust, he just kept smiling like it was the best day of his life. He felt driven, like a puppet yanked onto the spotlight. If he kept playing his part, everyone would finally turn their eyes on him. With his tale finished, he swivels toward Lisbeth and Maya, still wearing that dark shadow that won't let his eyes show, and asks what they think, cracking up at his own tragic history like it's the funniest thing ever. Maya is stunned, unable to wrap her head around how His Highness has been treated with cruelty his whole life. Then it hits her. He was brutally honest just to make Lisbeth hate him, but Maya can't believe he had to go that far. He realizes Maya only just got made and still doesn't know the whole story, and then a bitter thought hits him. His own servants are now turning the knife against him. He's dead sure the Frostvale maiden would never lay a hand on a man as pitiful as him, not in a million years. Elizabeth doesn't recoil in disgust or snap back with scorn. She breaks, tears flooding her face as she stares at him, aching with heartbreaking sorrow. Her sudden act of empathy smashes straight through him, leaving him completely speechless. He's stunned by her tears, blurts out a quick apology for talking so long, and when he sees she's flustered, he immediately hands over his handkerchief. As he plunges his hand into his coat pocket, it hesitates and fumbles for a heartbeat. As he rushes, another thing tumbles out of his pocket, a lone gold coin that clatters on the floor, flashing like a tiny spotlight. And that's when stardust is made. Maya and even Rudolph stares down in shock. Maya flashes the gold coin at the prince, but Lisbeth keeps wiping at a tear. Then the prince ignores the money, yanks out his handkerchief, and slumps down, completely rattled by the whole interruption. He turns his back on her, brushing off the whole thing as if it has zero to do with her, and Lisbeth just quietly takes the handkerchief, then dabs at her eyes. Staring at the empty teacups, Maya declares it's time to end their meeting for good. As they stride away from the table, Maya waves wildly behind him, begging the prince in silence to take Lisbeth's hand. Then the prince snaps his head back and tells his maid, quietly but firmly, to shut up. Walking beside Lisbeth, he's stuck in his own head, watching her tears and begging himself to understand why she broke down. Did his story sound so hilarious it left her crying? He shoots her a look, trying to crack the mystery of what she's thinking. They reach her carriage, and Lisbeth gives him a stiff, formal thanks for his trouble, but her eyes still look heavy. Rudolph presses on anyway, urging her to take a breath and send her answer by letter, after she's had time to think about the engagement. Lisbeth looks genuinely thrown off by the idea of a letter, and he doubles down on his request, begging her to slow down, think it through, and really take her time while Maya watches from the side, tense as hell. He tells Lisbeth that if she rejects the engagement indirectly, they can dodge any nasty confrontation, but Lisbeth glares at him and says it won't be needed. With pure, unshakable conviction, she makes her choice loud and clear. She'll accept the engagement. Her words hit him like lightning. Instant shock plastered across the prince's face, eyes bulging in disbelief as sweat starts pouring down. He can't wrap his head around it. He blurts out one shaky question, why? Then Lisbeth dips her head, soft and humble, and pleads for his understanding and support, even knowing she's still green. The prince's cool facade finally cracks. He wobbles on his feet like he can't hold it together, and Maya, his maid, darts to his side to steady him as she congratulates him on his hard-earned success. He clutches his head in panic, mind slamming at top speed, and he can't stop thinking how this went from bad to deadly so fast, because if things keep going like this, he's sure he's going to get killed. As panic surges through him, Lisbeth wheels toward Maya and praises her in a low, steady voice for a job perfectly done. Maya snaps a finger to her lips, sealing the secret, and says her lady's wish is her command. Then Lisbeth orders her to keep watching the prince. Prince Rudolph can't stop thinking about those 3 days since his engagement to Lisbeth, the Frostvale maiden, because he's fully convinced she's destined to end his life. He decides his safest move is to stay far away from her, because that anger could get deadly, still clueless about what she really feels. But he refuses to let himself be killed by her hands, and then, just like that, his plan crashes. But then he's hit with the wildest shock. His head, face, and arm are wrapped up in bandages, and Lisbeth is right there, tightening another one with careful hands while he's spiraling inside, screaming, "How did I even get here?" His confusion crashes into full-blown panic the moment it clicks. She's really in his room. The bandages are done, and Lisbeth lifts a spoonful of soup to his face, telling him it's packed with medicinal herbs to speed his recovery, then orders him to open up. Her coils wriggled with embarrassment, insisting she didn't need to feed him, and blurting apologies for messing up her work. He tries to play it cool with a jittery grin, swearing he's just clumsy and only hurt himself tumble down the stairs, insisting she's got nothing to worry about because it happens all the time, while Lisbeth just listens, her face staying completely unreadable. He stays silent as the door swings open. Maya steps in with a tea set in hand, and the maid greets Prince Rudolph with a bright smile, firing questions about how his meeting with the emperor went, then teasingly asking whether he'd tripped on the palace stairs. She sets the tea on the table and snaps her focus to Lisbeth. Maya smirks and says Lisbeth told her he fell down the stairs, and that sweet little lie just hangs there, awkward and loud in the room. Her words snap a realization into Lisbeth's mind, and her face brightens because she says it straight. Rudolph's story was a lie, and those injuries didn't come from some accident. They came from an assault. She snaps her razor-sharp eyes onto Rudolph, grabs him by the collar, and demands the truth if he only went to see the emperor. Then why is he battered like this? She won't let up, pushing him for answers with shaking urgency. Who attacked him, and what was their motive? Her sharp question hits Prince Rudolph like a wave, no bruises. Just a punch to the past, and he staggers anyway, trying to shrug off his injuries while his mind snaps back to that massive, echoing hall where he'd been left doubled over, choking on his breath, with hostile figures closing in around him. He tried to hold back a laugh and ask what they were doing. Then suddenly his collar got yanked hard, snapping him upward like a trap had just closed. The man gripping him sneered and snapped that Rudolph had the nerve to walk ahead of Sir Robin. The third prince then he spat that he was nothing but a filthy pig, demanded he be disciplined. And Rudolph knew this cruelty by heart, because his brother Robin had been turning him into a punching bag ever since they were kids. That swift kick blasted him straight to the floor, and his attacker made it crystal clear, assault a royal, And it's a capital crime, yet nobody in this palace would lift a finger to help him. The third prince just watched, grinning like he couldn't wait. And this wasn't some random place, it was the Scorpio Palace, one of the 13 imperial divisions where his brother ruled. Rudolph clenched every last bit of defiance he had left, then spat straight into his tormentor's face. Smug arrogance flipped instantly into pure, shocked rage. His fist slammed into his cheek. Then the memory blurred and the present snapped back. Rudolph spun away from Lisbeth, insisting what happened had nothing to do with her, and practically pleaded for her to stop worrying, claiming he didn't want to dig into it anymore either. She locks eyes with him, her stare sharp and unshakable. Then after a beat of silence, she doesn't push. She just takes his dodge and calmly asks, "Is that so?" His refusal becomes a shield because he's sure he'll never be able to open his heart to her one day. He's convinced she'll turn into his enemy, the one who's coming for his life. Maya suddenly breaks the tension. She steps forward, hands on her hips, and fires straight at Lisbeth, declaring that she understands exactly what the prince is trying to say. She snaps into a confident salute and flashes a proud grin, then tells Lisbeth, loud and steady, that the prince's wounds are honorable scars, taken while he fought off ruffians who dared to stand in his way, so there's absolutely nothing to fear. She strutted in, tail held out like it was the truth. Then Prince Rudolph's face snapped into shock, and he blurted her name in alarm, demanding to know what she was claiming and why she'd paint him like some kind of wild rumor. Maya only smirked back, saying it was him who caught Mrs. Tapple in the act, and that when it comes to fighting, that's just his nature. He never backs down. She was convinced he'd cooked up some kind of plan, but when the real memories came back, the truth hit like a hammer, way different from what she expected. In a grand hall, Prince Robin towered over his brother and drove a brutal kick into him, sneering as he demanded face first on the floor if Rudolph had finally learned his lesson. His henchmen chimed in that they'd already wasted too much time, and Robin simply cut off his brother's stubborn resistance. He scrambled upright, panic exploding across his face, and the moment he clocked the delay, a jolt of dread hit, because now he'd be late for his appointment with her father. Just as the worry started to spiral, the Emperor's head butler suddenly burst in, and Prince Robin, with his associate, went completely still. That stern man strode right up, snapped, "What's going on here?" Then shifted his gaze to the disheveled Rudolph and demanded, "Are you all right?" Then he locked eyes with Prince Robin, and his voice cut like a blade. The butler snapped that by injuring Rudolph, Robin had stained the Emperor's name, and there was no way he was getting out of this. Rudolph shot in fast, trying to cool things down, and blurted that it was nothing but a typical brotherly quarrel. A head butler wasn't buying a single excuse. He snapped at the young prince to save it for later, shoved him to hurry along, and reminded him the Emperor was waiting, while Prince Robin got left behind, his face twisting into a furious, uncontrollable rage. As he walked off, Rudolph's mind raced. He knew his plan paid off, even with that brutal move where he struck his own face just to drag the fight out, banking on the head butler stepping in if he ran late for his appointment with the Emperor. A grim grin cracked across his lips because he wasn't the same anymore. He strode through the grand hall, his resolve tightening with every step, armed with the memories of his past life and the knowledge of what's coming. Then he swore to live through every last second, no matter what. His mind wasn't on his brother Robin at all. He didn't care one bit. All his focus was on the young woman across from him. He had to read what Lisbeth was thinking, because that awful silence between them felt like it was screaming. A slow, creeping smile crawled onto Lisbeth's face, and the sharp glint in her eyes jolted a shiver straight through his spine. The prince jerked back, a wave of cold sweat bursting out as her predatory stare pinned him in place. Leaning in out of nowhere, Lisbeth shot forward and closed the gap, then hit him with, "So how'd it go with the Emperor?" and wouldn't let up until she wrung out every detail, especially whether his father brought up their engagement. The meeting's memory came roaring back. Lisbeth showed up late, sputtering apologies to the Emperor, and even then she couldn't miss how smoothly he'd handled the engagement all by himself. Inside the throne room, Rudolph finally spotted his mother, Beatrice, sprawled across the Emperor's lap, purring at his majesty to toss the boy aside and play with her. Instead, so the Emperor snapped at her as a hopeless woman, Rudolph just stood there, thanking her for saving the engagement. But his mind wouldn't stop asking why she was there at all. At his mother's urging, the Emperor cut him off and ordered him away, telling Rudolph he could leave. But from this day on, he'd better know his place. The prince had no choice but to spin around and stomp off. Back in the present, Rudolph wrapped up his story and told Lisbeth it was nothing special, just the usual. A shadow slid across her face as she stared down, and in a soft, steady voice she muttered, "I see." The disappointment hit the air like a weight. He stared at her, genuinely baffled, and admitted he couldn't believe she was in his chambers when he came back. Then he snapped, "So why are you here?" He freezes in total disbelief as Lisbeth calmly declares she's coming to see him. His heart pounds as he fights his own mind, forcing himself to remember she's the enemy. Then Lisbeth tilts her head and asks straight up if it's really weird to care about her fiancé's health. Like, does he get hurt all the time? She points at his injuries, and with iron resolve, she snaps from now on. She's coming to see him in his room every single day, leaving him completely stunned. With her mind made up, Lisbeth locks in her promise and vows to visit him every single day. Maya stands there, fretting over the prince, but she still nods along with the plan, only for Rudolph to balk, because he thinks daily visits are way too much. The prince realizes he's getting trapped piece by piece like a butterfly tangled in a spider's web, with no escape in sight. That night, beneath a blazing full moon, everything suddenly changes. The story swings over to Farkrant's towering, intimidating mansion. Inside those walls, a voice echoes through the halls, thanking Maya. Lisbeth's voice rang as she talked to her maid, Maya explaining that once Maya became Rudolph's personal maid, she'd finally been able to get close to him. Then Lisbeth grinned with total confidence and told Maya to keep eyes on the prince, and Maya bowed like it was an honor. Maya snaps to attention and catches Lisbeth, staring with that dreamy, love-struck look, sighing as she melts over Prince Rudolph's amber eyes, his gentle voice, and his dignified presence when the maid urgently calls out her name. She jolts back to reality, and her maid calmly but firmly calls her out, telling her she's wearing her feelings all over her face and should rein it in just a bit. She kept that smug grin on her face while Maya, all flustered, asked why she'd been acting like that. Then the maid snapped back that if Lisbeth really loved the prince, she wouldn't be so icy and rude. Leaving him confused, Lisbeth just shrugged and said she'd been wearing a poker face the whole time. The maid relived every second like it was burned into her mind. Lisbeth's face and words hit like ice, cold enough to turn anyone away. Lisbeth's composure finally snapped. She blurted that she couldn't help it, cheeks blazing as she confessed she'd been crushing on him for ages. She blurted it out, hands flying to cover her blushing face, saying every time she tries to talk to him, her nerves hit like a truck. Her face tightens. Her mind goes totally blank while Maya just stared, shocked that someone who looked so confident could be this shy underneath. Her maid tried to steady her nerves, praising Lisbeth for digging deep and finding the courage to move forward. Yet Maya couldn't shake the fear of what came next. Lisbeth's calm snapped tighter than before. She straight up said she didn't need courage for these daily visits. Then she turned, yanked an ornate glaive off the wall, and let her mind go cold with one vow: she would never forgive what was done. Clutching that heavy weapon, her eyes blazed with fury as she swore to guard the prince at her side and grind the idiots who caused it all into rust on her glaive. The horror of what he'd endured hit her like a punch, and she couldn't forgive herself for staying ignorant of his pain for so long. Now Maya's maid panicked and tried to soothe her at once, begging her to put the dangerous weapon away. But Maya snapped that this attack was a one-time exception, and that the person who probably hurt Prince Rudolph, the third prince, wouldn't be showing up at the Scorpio Palace. She puffed her chest out with pure pride and said ever since that mess with the old senior maid Tapple, nobody in the palace dared to talk back to His Highness because those troublemakers were wiped out. All thanks to Prince Rudolph's brand new personal maid. Yes, her. Elizabeth, fed up with her maid's smug grin, snatched her cheeks and squeezed hard, so hard Maya squealed. "Are you showing off?" Elizabeth snapped. Her fury finally fizzles out, and she clutches a pillow to her chest, cheeks burning red. Then she steadies herself and declares she wants to be someone special to Prince Rudolph, too. Maya's sly smile flares as she pounces on Lisbeth's confession, insisting this is the real reason she shows up at the prince's side every single day, no guard duty. Just a date. Lisbeth stares in shock, because just moments ago she'd been sure she was seconds away from death. Red-faced with embarrassment, she crumples to the floor, sobbing that she can't possibly do it, while Maya stays solid, pushing, cheering, and insisting she'll speak with His Highness as soon as possible. No excuses. She lifts a finger, and wide-eyed Lisbeth freezes because that all-important day is about to slam into their lives. Lisbeth finally clicks into place as she stands beside Maya in that corridor whispering, "It's only a week away." It's her birthday party, and the thought of dancing with Prince Rudolph sends a wild rush through her pure joy, non-stop nerves, like she might drop dead right there. While her mistresses wrestle with their feelings, Maya watches as Lisbeth steels herself, ready to face the night. Suddenly, Maya slams her master to the floor in a nasty hold, smiling as she declares, "This is payback for earlier," while Lisbeth tries to protest through the pain, but gets brushed off. That night, the moon hangs over the palace like a spotlight. Prince Rudolph lies awake in his bed, hands locked behind his head, staring at the ceiling as he wrestles with the truth about Lisbeth. Could she really be the same Frostvale maiden from Hero Wilhelm's legend? He feels that something's off, sure. She's icy like the legend's promise, but her visits never felt like mere duty. He flung himself onto the bed, heart pounding as his mind tore apart the weird gaps in this new timeline. Tapple's fall, his own hunt for a fiancée, none of it ever happened in the history he swore was real. And the worst part, he couldn't shake the gut feeling that every choice he made nudged this world off the original track. That line of thinking hit him like a freight train. No matter how hard he tried to dodge Lisbeth, she'd chase him anyway. And there was only one fate waiting him, walking straight into a future where he ends up marrying her. A wild thought stormed into his mind, and a chilling idea followed this dread felt unavoidable. If marrying Lisbeth really couldn't be escaped, then maybe something else was trapped in the same fate. The idea hit him like a lightning strike. If their marriage was written in fate, then was his own death next, locked in no matter what. As the prince wrestled with that brutal thought, the night kept sinking deeper and deeper. Meanwhile, beneath a full moon, a grand mansion sat dead silent, its long corridors soaked in shadow. In one of its rooms, a cool breeze rattled the curtains, and a man's voice cut through the quiet, reminding her that her birthday was about to be here. Those words were meant for Lisbeth. His voice kept rolling on, swearing he'd be back to pick her up. The second son of the Sauvelier family stood there with a glass of wine in his hand, eyes locked with pure determination. Then he made a silent promise he would claim Lisbeth, no matter what. Prince Rudolph sits there in cold silence across from Lisbeth Farkrantz until the quiet gets ripped apart. When his maid, Maya, storms in and startles him out of his trance, she demands he listen, because Lisbeth has gone to extreme lengths to tell him something major about his birthday party coming up. He takes it all in as Maya makes it clear, since the party's hosted by his fiancée, he's not going alone, and showing up with a woman outside his family would be unforgivably rude. Rudolph swallows the disappointment and accepts it anyway, even though he's crushed that Maya can't come with him. Then he leans in close, whispers a secret request, and tells her to get something ready for him before he leaves. Her face brightens with comical grit, and Maya practically bounces into the job, promising to fetch him anything he wants and swearing she'll charm Lisbeth at the party. Then a full week flies by, and the story jumps to the grand estate, where the celebration is about to kick off. As soon as Rudolph shows up, Marquis Douglas and Mrs. Teresa from the Farkrant family welcome him with full ceremony. Then the prince's confidence instantly wobbles under the Marquise's harsh stare, even as Rudolph still bows and thanks them for the invitation. A maid calls out his arrival to Lisbeth, and Rudolph quietly panics, trying to steady himself before facing her. Right then, Lisbeth steps into view, wrapped in a breathtaking, elegant gown, her hair styled to perfection, cheeks dusted with a soft blush, as she watches shy, nervous, and quietly waiting. Rudolph stares in shock as Lisbeth sweeps in with a graceful curtsy, thanking him for showing up. Then he panics, stammers that the honor is all his, and from a few steps away, Mrs. Farkrantz watches with a knowing little smile. She tells him to relax, says the party's got plenty of time before it even starts, then slips out, leaving them alone. The second they're standing in that huge empty room, Rudolph's brain shuts off like someone cut the power, and panic crashes over him as every single thing he planned to say vanishes from his mind. Panic spikes as he and Lisbeth both blurt words at the same time. And then dead awkward silence locks in. She smiles and motions for him to go first. And after a shaky struggle, he finally stammers out a compliment, telling Lisbeth she looks incredibly beautiful. His words made her eyes widen just a little, and then a bright, real smile burst across her face. She couldn't stop herself from saying how happy she was to hear it. Flustered by the moment, she covered her blushing cheeks and shot the compliment right back, telling him he looked equally elegant. While they're soaking it all in, some unseen guest near the shadows starts whispering, asking if this shy girl really is Lisbeth, the Frostvale legend, the same girl the epic says was in love with Wilhelm. Yet their gossip slips right past everyone, as Rudolph suddenly snaps back to his real mission and rushes to tell Lisbeth he's got something meant for her. Just as he was about to hand over his gift, the doors burst open. Then another guest stormed in, the second son of a Sauvelier family, striding with a cocky grin and calling Lisbeth by name. He kept spiraling in worry because he hadn't heard from her. Then his face lit up the moment he learned she was safe. He told her she'd never looked more beautiful. And then he dropped the bombshell he was Wilhelm, the hero from the epic, and he swore that he and Lisbeth were destined to be together. Rudolph slid between them, gripping the other man's shoulder tight, and told the guest calm as ice that Lisbeth already had visitors, then challenged him like he couldn't read the room, leaving the prince staring in total confusion, because he genuinely thought Lisbeth and Wilhelm were lovers. His move sparked a chilling shift in Lisbeth. Her face twisted with raw fury as she grabbed the Sauvelier's son by the wrist, snarling for him not to lay a finger on the prince. Then she yanked them back with shocking strength, her face twisted in pure disgust and fury, and she laughed at the thought of destiny forcing them together, because with venom dripping from every word, she blasted him as the one who ruined her most sacred memories. Arms crossed in defiance, she told the stuntman she wasn't joking. She was engaged to Prince Rudolph. And that sentence left the Sauvelier's son stunned, spiraling as everything clicked into place. Her furious accusation about defiled memories kept slamming into his mind, and it wasn't a lover's quarrel at all. She looked at him like she genuinely hated him. The memory she spilled was straight from their childhood, an epic moment the tale even captured. Back then, young Prince Rudolph was bullying her, yanking her hair like it was fun. Then Sauvelier's son burst in, roaring at him to stop. They exchanged a quick, grateful look. Then the boy had to go, but before he left, he shoved a tiny round object into her palm and urged her to take it. He remembered it like it happened yesterday. He'd handed her a brooch and sworn they'd meet again, a scene historians later turned into one of the most beloved love stories in the epic. With a grin, he leaned in and asked if she still remembered the question from his letter, the gift he gave her on the very day they first met. She reached for the keepsake from that day and held it up, sharp and sure, then coldly declared that what he'd given her wasn't some legendary brooch at all. It was just a button. He stammered, unable to believe a word of it. Lisbeth, though, stood firm. She called him a liar, snapped that his excuses meant nothing, and ordered him to never show his face to her again. Completely crushed, the Sauvelier's son could only nod and leave for the day, while Prince Rudolph watched the whole blow-up in silent shock. He froze in stunned silence, his mind screaming that the events didn't match everything he'd ever learned. And then, like ice water in his veins, one chilling thought hit. What if his own actions had rewritten the past? The pieces finally snapped into place. He realized the brooch tale was probably a made-up, overhyped story cooked up by historians just to spike the drama, even claiming Wilhelm manhandled Lisbeth. In his head, it turned into a total farce, a lovesick, Wilhelm chasing after Elizabeth who couldn't care less. That realization slammed terror into his chest. If the epic was a lie, then the real story meant it was him who stole Lisbeth from Wilhelm, and now Wilhelm would be hunting him with hatred and revenge in his eyes, and even the thought of assassination had him frozen. Because that danger would still find him even if he never wore the emperor's crown. This was way too deadly to handle. With fear crashing through him, Lisbeth snapped around to face Rudolph, her rage gone, replaced by a heartbreaking quiet as tears brimmed in her eyes. She apologized for every bit of trouble she'd caused, then urged, softly but firmly, that they call off the engagement. Rudolph could only freeze there, staring like he couldn't breathe, stunned by the words because she kept apologizing again and again. He stared at her tear-soaked face and realized this wasn't some small request. It was something heavy, something dangerous. Her look screamed that there was more to it. "Tell me everything," he urged, tossing his own worries aside because he remembered how she'd warned him about a past lover who tracked her down, and now he couldn't stop himself from demanding the full story. He pushed forward, demanding to know what went down between her and that man, then instantly regretted it, because her face answered him before she even spoke. Anxiety, agitation and raw fear. Like she was fighting a storm inside, desperate to tell her story, but terrified he'd judge her, trapped under nothing but pure despair. That look of pure despair slammed into him, and one brutal thought hit like a punch. He refused to let Lisbeth ever wear that face again. He leaned in close and murmured that, no matter what, she hadn't changed a bit. He dropped to his knees in front of her, cupping her hands with careful tenderness, then leaned in and asked for one thing: could she hear his story first? His most precious memories ruined and defiled by that very man. Man Farkrantz and Prince Rudolph finally trade stories, and when she says it, it hits hard. 9 years ago. At just 5 years old, her father dragged her to the Imperial Palace, and that's where Wilhelm burned into her memories for good. The memory snaps back to that day, young, wide-eyed Lisbeth, gripping her father's hand as the Grand Palace towers over them. She dashes through the garden, blazing with excitement, pointing out every gorgeous flower, while her father keeps warning her, slow down, don't sprint like that, or you'll trip and fall. Even after his warning, she trips, then crashes onto the stone path in a heap. Her father yells her name in panic, but she pops right back up with a grin, insisting she's totally fine, and it's nothing. He beams with proud laughter as he praises her for being such a good girl, and she proudly shows him an amulet hanging at her neck, his gift to her. She tells him it's a Farkrantz family tradition. That amulet, carried by the first lord of their house through every one of his wars, is said to grant the wishes of whoever wears it. Then her father smiles and lovingly tells her to guard it with care. Inside the palace, her father scoops her up and seats her in a huge ornate chair, books piled all around her. He tells her, "I've got something vital to handle," and then marches off with the other noblemen, leaving her stranded there by herself. She plops down for a second, cheeks puffed out like she's painfully bored and itching to be anywhere else. She can't stand it anymore, so she slips off the chair and slips into the palace corridors, hunting for the garden she'd glimpsed outside. She stumbles into a huge, empty hall, and when the realization hits that she has no idea where she is, she blurts out into the silence, desperate to find her way. The palace's stern head butler snaps to attention when her call rings out, showing up with young Prince Robin in tow, flanked by attendants. He stares her down and barks that he's never seen her before, demanding to know if she even realizes she's inside the Imperial Palace. Then the attendant leans in with a cold, deadly warning. Any intruder gets put to death. Prince Robin shuts his attendant up the second he clocks her clothes and realizes she's a guest. Then his smile curdles fast. He's suddenly craving someone to try his new sword skills on Capture Her. He barks at both men. When the attendant stalls, Robin turns savage and threatens to make him the target instead. The moment the men surge forward, terror slams into young Lisbeth like a wave. She bolted in pure panic, mind spinning with no answers. Why were they hunting her? Behind her, the pursuers' voices snapped through the air, barking for her to be caught. Her desperate sprint kept blasting through the opulent palace corridor, sobbing for help, until someone yanked her wrist from an alcove and dragged her away from the main hall with a sudden jolt. Right as she vanished, her pursuers barreled past one, even barking that Her Highness would pay with a week without her carriage if they didn't catch her. With no one watching, she was suddenly face to face with a young, white-haired boy. He spoke softly, asking whether those men were hunting her, and she could only freeze, staring at him, trying to figure out exactly who he was. He shot her a calming smile and swore she'd be safe. No one would ever spot her in this hiding spot. Then, after a tense pause, he tiptoed to the edge and peeked out, only to confirm the corridor was completely empty. He spun back to her and demanded where she'd been trying to go, and when she looked up, shocked, she suddenly started stammering out a shaky, unsure answer. She swept her out of the palace and straight into a huge, sun-soaked garden, and she nearly gasped at how stunning the flowers were. When she asked if she could pick a few, he didn't hesitate. Then the two of them sank down together right among the blooms. In the garden's calm hush, they sat face to face, and the girl wove the flowers she'd gathered into a delicate crown, her hands moving with careful focus. She grinned as she carefully set the finished flower crown on his head, and the second it touched him, his smile lit up, matching hers perfectly. That calm moment got ripped apart. His eyes snapped wide with instant panic when he spotted two figures closing in from afar, the head butler and another man. Without a word, he shoved her back into a thick hedge, and she jolted in surprise. His palms snapped up, finger to his lips as he hissed, "Shh." urging her to stay out of sight while he blocked her from anyone who might spot them. He holds his ground as Prince Robin closes in with his crew. Robin even perched on one of his men, sneering and asking if Rudolph is really fit to enter this garden, then brushing it off by declaring, "I'm a nice guy," while Lisbeth stays tucked in the bushes, trembling, her eyes blazing with fear. Then his brother rips into him with a nasty insult, barking, "So, did you see any girl our age?" While Robin has no clue because Lisbeth's peeking out from behind Rudolph's back. He calmly swears he hasn't seen a soul. Robin nods like it's over, but Rudolph's face stays tight, tense, and full of shadow. That fake acceptance collapses instantly when Robin launches a vicious kick straight into his face, sending him stumbling back in a daze. Then he snarls, flat out saying he always knew Rudolph was lying, calling him trash that would lie without even blinking. As he crashes to the ground, gripping his bruised cheek, Robin snaps for his attendants to pin him down while the head butler stalls for a beat before Robin drives him to hurry. They yank him into their grip, and Robin leans right in, jaw tight, demanding the girl's location, swearing the torture will stop the second he talks from her hiding place. Lisbeth is shaking with tears as she watches Rudolph get dragged through this nightmare, silently screaming, "Why?" Just as the interrogation starts to bite, the noon bell tolls and abruptly slices it short. The head butler leans in and tells His Highness it's lunchtime. Robin grunts in pure frustration, drops his efforts, and storms out with his man. As soon as they're gone, he hauls himself up from the dirt, face bruised and burning, staggers toward Lisbeth's hiding spot, blurts out an apology for shoving her earlier, and asks if she's hurt, then insists he's okay, because getting treated like this is something he's learned to live with. His calm shrug at the abuse shatters her. She bursts into tears. Stunned, he snaps, "Why are you crying?" And she breaks down, sobbing that anyone would cry after hearing someone say they're used to getting hit. He stares at her, and it hits him no one has ever cried for him before. Lisbeth steadies herself, then flashes him a shining gold coin, thanking him for saving her, saying her father promised it could grant her wishes. He stared at the coin, and suddenly a memory snapped into focus. Not his, but someone else's from 9 years ago. A young boy with reddish-brown hair thanked a dark-haired girl, swearing that since she'd paid attention to him, one of his wishes was already granted. The girl's eyes widened. She leaned in and asked what kind of wish it even was. The memory kept rolling. One servant spotted him in the garden, but another boy with white hair bolted before anyone could even catch his name. And when the man replayed that moment in the present, it hit him like a punch to the gut. It couldn't possibly be real. His thoughts slammed into overdrive because 9 years ago, in the Imperial Palace, a girl had pressed that same gold coin into his hand, and there was no way she was Lisbeth. He still remembered how brutally his father chewed him out after that day. Then 10 years later, the very same kind of coin showed up again, only this time from that boy. And the prophecy clicked into place like a lock turning. Lisbeth would rise as the Frostvale Maiden, and she was going to kill him. The moment snapped back to the present. Lisbeth lifted a gleaming gold coin dangling from a chain and asked Prince Rudolph if he had one just like it. His eyes went huge with shock as he stared from the coin to her warm, smiling face, completely frozen, unable to get a single word out. Tears streamed down his face as he finally started explaining how, through every brutal struggle, hardship, and gut-wrenching pain, when he swore he'd shatter, her memory was the only thing that kept him standing. He crumpled to his knees, yanked her into a desperate hug, and blurted out the truth. Her coin and the memories of her are what kept him standing through everything. He crushed her in a tight embrace, thanking her through the tremble in his voice for saving him and for actually paying attention to him. Lisbeth sobbed too, clinging back just as hard, whispering that she felt the same way, because she'd been wanting to tell him her gratitude for him forever. Just like that, the moment cracked, he jerked back, cheeks blazing, and blurted her name with a stutter. Then he snapped that it was time to go, remembering his birthday party, and when he swung the door open, his eyes went wide with pure alarm. He spun back toward her, barking questions about the man named Wilhelm and what he meant to her, and the moment Lisbeth answered, her face darkened as she called Wilhelm proof of her own stupidity. Rudolph just gaped in confusion while she strode off down the long hall. From a secret hiding place, the Sauvelier's son stared as his own fist clenched tight, no doubt in him anymore. If the world kept spinning like this, Lisbeth would end up marrying Rudolph, and he snapped, right then and there, that it would not happen. He froze in stunned silence as the truth hit him like a punch. Could someone else, somewhere, know the future's history? Too, his thoughts spun out of control because the picture forming in his mind was terrifying. Lisbeth, standing triumphant over the fallen Prince Rudolph, and now he could feel it in his bones. This was the timeline that had to happen. Rudolph was going to die by her hands, and there was no future left for him. Lisbeth Farkrantz stands before Prince Rudolph, heart pounding as she's ready to confess. Then she tells him the truth. About a year ago, her foolish past self ran into the man she once knew as Wilhelm at a party. And in the flashback, a younger Lisbeth sits alone in a grand hall, surrounded as nobles crowd in, begging for her attention. Nobles shove their sons at her like they own the place, pleading for a dance or a song, but she snapped, shoved them back hard, and screamed at them to get out of her face. It was desperation, plain and loud, because she wasn't an adult yet. She couldn't hire investigators or spies, and that left her feeling totally trapped, cornered, and done for. She knew 8 brutal years had slipped, and she still couldn't track the person from her memories until that moment finally came, and she found them. The memory snaps to a young man with reddish-brown hair closing in on her, gripping one perfect white rose. Then he grins and says, "We finally met," calling her his destined soulmate. Met his eyes with a cold stare. Then Lisbeth cut in, asking who he was and snapping that she wanted nothing to do with shallow men soaked in dishonesty. He just laughed and shrugged it off, saying how rough she was. A calm smile stays on his face as he asks if she could have really forgotten him. Then he digs into it, reminding her of that day 8 years back in the Imperial Garden, when white jasmine bloomed like a dream, and he and she laughed together for one blissful moment. The memory hits Lisbeth like a punch, and she just freezes, stunned. He tells her about how he looks now, because out of his whole family, he's the only one with that weird hair color, and rumors have swarmed for years. So to shut them down, he dyed it red. When Lisbeth asks what it used to be, he admits it's exactly the same color he had the day they first met. The memory replays it, his words. "At last, we met, my destined soulmate." In the background, a young attendant gasps. Then back in the present, Lisbeth tells Rudolph the truth. Her need to find him was so intense it fogged her judgment, and she ended up trusting him completely, without question. She wraps up her first story and tells Rudolph that ever since then, she's been meeting Wilhelm on a regular schedule, just tea maybe once a month. Hearing her tale about Wilhelm lit a raw, visceral irritation in Prince Rudolph's chest, but he couldn't even pin down why it hit him so hard. He noticed her distress, and she, misreading his face, spiraled into panic. Convinced he was disappointed because she believed a liar, so she hurried to reassure him, fighting to make him understand she wasn't mad at him at all. He snapped that it was fine and pushed her to carry on, but underneath it all, rage simmered. He wanted to rip his past self to shreds. Then Lisbeth steadied herself with an apology, and the prince's mind went into overdrive, because none of it made sense. How could this Wilhelm be the one telling her the exact story of how they met, when the eyes matched but the hair color, its texture, the look in his gaze, and even the shape of his mouth were totally different? She confessed that she'd foolishly trusted him at first, but the longer their conversation dragged on, the more dread curdled in her gut. So she pressed him about the item she'd given him the very first time they met. And as he listened, Rudolph couldn't help wondering if the man still had it, or if he'd never cared enough to keep it close. In her mind, that moment clung like a bruise. When she asked about Wilhelm, the room went deathly silent, and his face stayed impossible to read. He finally shattered the silence and shot back, "No, it's the other way around," insisting her memories mattered too much to him to risk a single scratch. So he'd kept them locked up tight to prevent any harm. A strange, evasive answer, like he just froze in place. He could only mumble, barely audibly, "Is that so?" That's the exact moment Lisbeth's attendant remembered, right when her mistress had described it. And that's when Lisbeth's doubts finally started digging deeper. She grilled him about it again and again, but every single time, he dodged the question. Then the attendant cut straight to Lisbeth and demanded to know, did she really believe this Wilhelm was the same boy from her memories? She had to admit it. Sure, time had passed, but he felt nothing like the stories anymore. And the truth was, she couldn't be certain anymore. The attendant jumped on the opening and pitched a plan. If this Wilhelm was a fake, then the real boy from her memories had to be somewhere out there. So she pushed for infiltrating the palace where Lisbeth first met him to dig up a clue, and Lisbeth waited, admitting her attendant had a point. Maya snatched the mission with bright confidence, swearing she'd slip into the palace like a ghost. Then Lisbeth, calm as ever, questioned if she really could pull it off. But Prince Rudolph suddenly surged forward in panic, yelling at them to stop and wait. Shock hit him like lightning. He jabbed a finger, blurted out, "Maya," and demanded to know if she was Lisbeth's agent. Lisbeth clapped a hand over her mouth and let out a tiny gasp at his sudden explosion. She snapped that a spy was impossible. Maya had been her maid and bodyguard since she was little, so any rat would have been sniffed out instantly. And Rudolph had to admit Maya looked far more capable than he'd guessed, but doubt still lingered at the edges. Then he fired the one question that mattered: if Maya was the only one who knew their past. How on earth did Wilhelm find out Lisbeth swore she'd told nobody? She said that after Maya slipped into the palace, she caught Lisbeth staring at a gold coin with this warm, aching look, and that's what made her suspect Prince Rudolph was the boy from her memories. Realizing it, Lisbeth snapped into accepting the engagement right away. Rudolph even joked that she decided insanely fast, and Lisbeth fired back, "Yeah, because you saw the gold coin I tried to hide." She kept going, telling how she made Maya hand Wilhelm that letter straight to the man they blamed for their break. And when it finally reached him, the Sauvalier's son just stood in the doorway demanding answers, shocked that she'd cut the cord so fast. Right there, Maya handed him one burning question. What in the world was the thing Lisbeth gave him that day, all those years ago? His face twisted darker as he blurted out that what Lisbeth handed him that day was just a brooch. Then Maya's smile vanished. Her stare turned ice cold, and she finally saw the truth. With that last shred of proof, it was over, case closed. Back in the present, Lisbeth leaned in and finished her story to Prince Rudolph, making it clear the man had been lying to her all along. He dragged his hand to his chin and stared, trying to make it click. Why did the imposter know the juicy details but miss the rest? Then a fresh theory snapped into place. Maybe the man had been at the palace that very day, watching them run and play in the garden. He kept insisting that the man might have only glimpsed Lisbeth passing him something, just not clearly enough to name it. And that's why he kept dodging every question until desperation finally cracked him, and he blurted out, "A brooch?" Even though a nagging doubt stayed in his gut, the story fit for now, but he knew the real reason behind the lie had to be hiding somewhere else. We can't ignore how the Farkrant family's power screams, "military monster," and every aristocrat or royal who wants to rule the empire drools over that strength, because if you marry Lisbeth, you lock in that backing, the same way Wilhelm once leaned on their support to smash the empire and build a new kingdom after the terrifying Emperor Rudolph died. This historical precedent lit a dark suspicion in him. Did Wilhelm's plan also include making Lisbeth kill him? Maya remembered Lisbeth's story like a punch to the gut. Lisbeth had spat out bitter laughter, calling herself a fool for being devastated, while Maya snapped back hard, screaming that Lisbeth wasn't to blame at all. The real culprit, she said, was the man who used them and stomped all over their shared memories. He snapped back to the moment and turned to Lisbeth, still sniffling, then gently told her to toss that man out of her mind because today was her birthday party, and they strolled side by side down a long, fancy hallway. The moment they stepped into the main hall, the whole crowd erupted, gasping, whispering, staring faces twisted in pure shock and total disbelief. Whispers from the crowd trailed after them as they walked. Everyone clocked Lisbeth's stunning beauty, then froze when they saw she was walking beside the tyrant prince, like she had no business being anywhere near someone like him. Lisbeth didn't flinch. She spun to him and said she had to greet the guests first and would meet him later, and he just answered with a quiet yes. While he stood there, the other ladies leaned in and whispered, shocked Lisbeth's engagement still hadn't been announced, and one of them smirked like she knew the secret. It's the Emperor's call. Once she was gone, he swallowed his curiosity and kept his mouth shut. No stirring rumors, no drama, just staying quiet like a fly on the wall for the rest of the event. And while everyone else kept the party going, Lisbeth dutifully made her rounds, smiling sweetly and greeting each noble and guest who'd come to celebrate her birthday. Social duty was crushing her, and weariness crept across her face, while two noblemen nearby traded loud gossip, gesturing wildly as if they were zeroing in on her and the whole mess that was unfolding. She takes her seat right beside Prince Rudolph as the party explodes into full swing, musicians blasting a lively tune, while servants weave through the crowd, keeping every guest taken care of. The music lights a spark under multiple couples, and they hit the floor, sliding across it in perfect sync with the melody. As he watches them, Rudolph realizes he's always been stuck on the sidelines until now, when he finally leans in and actually starts paying attention to the dance itself. Just as Rudolph starts to drown in his thoughts, Lisbeth whips around with a shy, hopeful blush and asks if he'll invite her to dance, and panic slams into him so hard he can barely breathe. The only dances he knows are from ancient village festivals, and they're totally useless right now. He realizes he has to scramble for a reason to say no fast. She catches his hesitation right away and presses, "What are you scared of?" Flustered beyond belief, Rudolph blurts out the truth: he's never danced a day in his life. Her face softens, and she tells him not to worry. Then she offers to be his very first partner. She slips his hands into hers, pulls him onto the floor, and guides him up with a firm, "Straighten your back. Feel the rhythm, and just follow me." Rudolph tries to keep up, but their steps are all clumsy chaos, so nearby guests start jeering, mocking him like he's doing a kid's dance. Then a noble woman crashes straight into him on purpose, knocks him off balance, once drops a fake sorry with a smug grin, and saunters off like she won. Whispers plus that collision slam into his head, and a savage storm of self-hatred rages inside him. Monstrous faces grinning, calling him a filthy pig who doesn't deserve Lady Lisbeth. Color drains from his face, but she has no clue at all, just smiles and tells him, "Let's try again." Her words barely touch the storm inside him, because in his head, one brutal spotlight shines on their shapes, and he can't stop asking himself if he can really stay by her like this. His fears aren't made up down the hall. Guests hiss that he's fresh off the training wheels, totally off the beat, and Marquise Farkrantz even clocked his clumsiness. Judging the prince's ineptitude to his face, Rudolph can practically feel their stares boring into him, locking in the idea that he's nothing but an outcast in these palace walls. And when you're paired against a high-class flower like her, that crushing gap in his heart feels impossible to cross. Dark thoughts pin him in place. He sees his future, the tyrant everyone warned about. His mind spins like a storm, and one question won't let go: should he finally surrender and become the cruel emperor history demands? Her voice slices through his grim days, and Lisbeth flashes him a warm smile, softly reminding him that when you dance, you don't stare into nowhere. You meet your partner's eyes. Those simple words snap him right back to the present. He stammers out an apology, composure crumbling, then without a beat agrees to try again, while her steady hand stays locked in his, quietly cheering him on. With fresh determination, he grabs her hand and says she's been staring at him all along. Then he demands she never look away from him again. And with that shift, their moves finally lock in sync right in front of everyone's eyes, so the guests can't help but gasp, realizing they're actually dancing the way they should. Marcus Farkrantz watches like a hawk, knowing how brutally hard it is for a beginner to lead, match steps, and time their breathing with their partner. Even the other noble women admit it. The prince looks downright impressive now. That awkward pause evaporates, and suddenly they move together, gliding across the dance floor, with a rush so electric it feels impossible to stop. Caught up in the beat, their faces light up with pure, unfiltered joy. The last note of the music dies out, and they snap into a bold pose right in the middle of the ballroom. Then the crowd erupts in a thunderclap of applause. The prince drops into a nearby chair, gasping like he's been sprinting for hours. Finally relieved, he pulled it off without embarrassing Lisbeth. Then she glides over, lights up with praise for his amazing performance. And when she spots how wiped out he is, she promises to bring him a drink. He drinks in her kindness, and as his mind rewinds those memories, a shocking realization hits him. The instruments and tempo may have changed, but the melody and beat still match that old village festival dance, the one his thoughts have been chasing without him even realizing it. He replays that wild village dance in his head, and it clicks. Those fleeting beats are exactly what taught him how to glide through the royal ball's formal steps. He drops into the nearest chair and lets out a long, shaky sigh, like all the tension from the performance finally rips out of his body. His relief snaps into iron resolve. He can do this. Even if the past screams that he'll end up dead as the Dread Emperor, he makes a vow to himself. He'll tear that future apart and rewrite it. He clenches his fist, that tiny determined smile lighting up his face, and he decides to carve a whole new road, building a bright little history where he can stay with Lisbeth forever. The moment that thought clicks into place, a man's voice cuts in demanding Rudolph's attention and asking for just a minute, and Rudolph jerks his head up, stunned, from his seat beside Lisbeth. Rudolph's jaw drops when he realizes the towering man is Marquis Douglas Farkrantz, Lisbeth's father. Then the Marquis rushes in with an apology for not greeting him right earlier, but Rudolph is so rattled he blurts that the apology should have been his. Meanwhile, Lisbeth lingers a few steps off, cheeks blazing, replaying that moment from the dance when Prince Rudolph's intense gaze locked onto her like she could have gotten swallowed up in those amber eyes. She snapped out of her daydream, sprinted up to the prince with a radiant smile, and handed him a glass of fruit water. Then told him he must be exhausted when he still didn't seem to clock her. She raised her voice again and demanded his attention. Right as Rudolph opens his mouth, the Marquis cuts in again, dead serious. He demands a single match from Prince Rudolph, and the words slam straight into Lisbeth, and Rudolph both just stare, stunned, trying to figure out what scheme he's cooking up. In the grand courtyard, a sparring showdown with Marquis Douglas is set up like training, and the Marquis hands Prince Rudolph a wooden sword only for Rudolph to freeze at the sudden weight of it, something he'd never bothered to think about before. When the hesitation shows, the Marquis clocks it instantly and demands to know what's wrong. He squints at the weapon up close and says that wooden sword looks like it's been in battle for years, while the Marquis's face falls into shadow, his expression impossible to read. Marquis backs it up, saying he's been doing it every single day since he was a kid, swinging it 1,000 times like it's muscle memory. Then he snaps into a brutal stance, and an intimidating aura explodes around him. A murderous aura pours off the Marquis like a fist, slamming into Rudolph so hard it knocks the breath from him, and his mind erupts with one terrified scream: death is coming. He's slammed by the crushing pressure, and suddenly he understands exactly what the Marquis is feeling. He hates this engagement, and inside his own head, the Marquis is already plotting, refusing to let that tyrant prince marry his daughter, Liz, while figuring out how to make any harm the prince suffers look like a training accident. With the tension snapping like a wire, Lisbeth barrels between them and begs Prince Rudolph to stop screaming that her father is the Empire's deadliest weapon, the Obsidian War Demon, and that anyone who dares to fight him gets left as mangled corpses. Rudolph just freezes, eyes wide, hit by the shocking truth. Bead after bead of sweat slides down his temple as he stares at her. He admits he's terrified out of his mind, but he knows he can't bolt from this challenge. His resolve only grows sharper, but Lisbeth refuses to budge, defiant as ever. She rejects her father's command to step back, while her mother yells her name and Lisbeth holds her ground. Standing between the danger and the prince, she refuses to leave unprotected. Right before the Marquis can move, Rudolph's voice slices through the tension. He raises one finger and throws down a duel condition. If he can land even a single hit on a Marquis body with a wooden sword, he wins. He signs on, but inside he's scoffing at the Marquis's big confidence, because this guy honestly thinks he can't even be grazed, and with nowhere to run, he bristles, misses the fractured chance as the bell finally hits, and the Marquis explodes forward the moment it does. He lunged forward with a wooden sword raised high, and even as he barreled in, one terrifying thought hit him. He'd never been taught swordsmanship in the first place. His mind sprinted in panic as memories flooded in how he'd learned by watching from the shadows, stalking the knights, mimicking their moves, and drilling every detail he could steal. Then, with a desperate yell, he crashed his attack straight into the unimpressed Marquis. The attack fizzled out in a violent blur. Then the Marquis snapped sideways and launched a crushing counterstrike, knocking Rudolph's sword clean out of his hands, while Lisbeth, from the sidelines, gasped in shock. He slammed onto the ground, dazed and stripped of his power, and Marquis Douglas loomed over him, wooden blade resting easy on his shoulder as he barked out a chilling command: next. He scrambled back up, then barreled forward with one more desperate scream right into the Marquis' swing, which met it clean and let out a sharp crack as Rudolph got knocked down again. Then the Marquis did it all over once more. The brutal brawl kept roaring on every time Rudolph surged back up. Another punch crashed into him, another vicious hit landed, and that same ruthless order snapped through the air. Watching from the sidelines, Lisbeth's calm, finely cracked tears streamed down her face as she begged, "Enough, please, stop." Her desperate plea was swallowed by silence. Then the Marquis roared and swung his weapon like a thunderbolt, crashing the prince through the air and hurling him backward. The prince slammed into the dirt, sprawled out cold and lifeless, and all he could think was, "No way, this can't be real." The Mark stared down at the battered young man, wearing contempt like armor. "So that's it, Prince Rudolph," he spat, his voice dripping with pure disdain. He crumpled on the ground, beaten, while Marquis Douglas loomed over him, cold as ice, saying that with strength this pathetic, the prince wouldn't be able to protect a single thing that actually mattered to him. Shaken by her father's cruelty, Lisbeth burst forward with her hand reaching out, pleading, "Stop," then turning on her heels to beg His Highness not to strike any further. He drowned out her cries, face swallowed by shadow, using a wooden sword like a crutch as he hauled himself upright. Then a memory hit him hard, the instant he'd decided to fight back and claw against the fate that had been waiting for him. He remembered the original timeline of history where he'd become a ruthless emperor and dropped dead at 25. But then his engagement to Lisbeth flipped everything, and suddenly the future didn't feel guaranteed anymore. This shift meant his life could be snuffed out any second, and that cold truth hit hard because now she was right beside him. Lisbeth was in the crosshairs too. That realization snapped everything into focus. He stared up at the Marquis where it watched him with a thoughtful look, and he demanded to know if this brutal test was the reason. Breathing hard, he kept yelling that the Marquis was putting him through a test because now he finally understood this trial was checking whether he had the strength and the steel will to protect Lisbon. Tears streaked his eyes from pain and exhaustion, but the fire in his gaze stayed locked in, and he swore he could keep going. With a defiant roar, he hurled himself into the air and slammed his wooden sword down in a desperate overhead strike, and the Marquis watched with pure disdain, smugly thinking that this reckless swing from a battered body was so obvious he could dodge it blindfolded. But when the blade came crashing down, his calm snapped like glass. The Marquis's eyes went wide as he was yanked into catching the wooden sword with his bare hand, and an overwhelming pressure slammed into him, pure lethal intent he couldn't brush off. Still, even with that brutal display, it didn't feel like enough. He gapes in disbelief as the wooden sword in his grip splinters on impact. Prince Rudolph's desperate swing hits with brutal force, and the practiced blade bursts into flying fragments. The blow rips backward and shatters the prince's own sword. Then before Rudolph can even blink, the Marquis shoves the broken hilt straight into the boy's midsection, knocking the breath clean out of him. The prince drops hard to the ground, his body shaking from that crushing hit, while Lisbeth and her mom, Teresa, stare from the sidelines, faces twisted in pure shock and horror at how brutal the duel turned out. Lisbeth snapped, shouting the alarm so loud her voice thundered across the training grounds. "Your Highness." Soon after the showdown finally ends, the palace's grand hall falls dead quiet, empty, silent, with dust swirling like tiny ghosts in the light. Prince Rudolph lies tucked into bed in his chambers, and the lavish room falls so still and quiet, it feels like the world is holding its breath around him. Elsewhere, Lisbeth charges straight at her father, her face carved from a pure fury, shaking with rage as she snaps. "Tell me, does it really have to go this far?" Her father speaks in a calm voice, but the truth hits hard after sparring with him. He's realized it's not optional. With the prince holding that high station, he had to see if Rudolph was truly worthy of being trusted with his precious daughter. She snaps back that his lack of skill isn't laziness. It's because nobody has ever cared enough to train him or even notice him. The Marquis nods and admits it. The prince's swordplay and brute strength are straight up beginner level. Then he tells her, "Look at this." He lifts the shattered hilt of Rudolph's practice sword and tells everyone it was worn out. Its toughness was basically on its last breath, and the snap wasn't random at all. Then it hits him. He realizes with a jolt His Highness aimed for that very thing. He finally got it, though. It looked like the prince was swinging at random. Every hit was actually driving him to land on that exact same spot, again and again. He leaned in, talking to the wide-eyed Lisbeth, saying it was probably a risky gamble whether the sword would snap or not, but then he made it crystal clear that wasn't even the real goal. As Lisbeth pressed him for answers, he broke down exactly what the prince had shown him, how to read the battered old wooden sword's condition, spot the opening, and strike back even when the skill gap looked hopeless. A spark of excitement flared in his eyes as he gripped the broken hilt, and he declared that His Highness is a diamond in the rough one that'll shine once the right polishing is done, though. It had been ages since anything like that. Thrill hit him. Meanwhile, the prince himself was dead asleep, murmuring into his pillow like nothing in the world could wake him. He stirred, cracked his eyes open inch by inch, and boom, there was Lisbeth, right in his face. Dazed, he muttered why she was there, and she went all formal, calling him Your Highness. The moment he tried to sit up, a razor-sharp pain ripped through his whole body and he gasped in agony. Lisbeth snapped at him right away, telling him to stay still. She eased him back down and his head settled right in her lap like a lap pillow. The shock hit him hard, and panic sparked in his chest as he blushed at how close she was, wondering if aristocrats really did this, especially since they'd only just gotten engaged. Lisbeth was just as flustered, cheeks blazing as she begged herself not to push the moment, and she couldn't stop picturing how furious her father would be if he caught them right there stepping on them. After a breath-stopping silence, the prince snapped his gaze to her and blurted, "What happened with the match?" desperate to know if he'd finally won her father's approval. As Lisbeth watched her father disappear into the distance, Marquis Douglas stood there, stunned by the prince's razor-sharp tactical genius and the brutal weight of pressure that seemed to cling to him. A sharp pang of sympathy hit him as he wondered what kind of hell Rudolph had been forced to swallow inside those palace walls. With a grimace, he made his decision. He wasn't standing by anymore. He spun back to his daughter, eyes blazing with resolve, and he swore this was for his precious girl and his son. Then, with fresh certainty, he ordered Lisbeth to stay right beside Prince Rudolph. Lisbeth rushed back to Rudolph's bedside and found him there, head resting in her lap. And then she leaned close and told him the truth he'd won, and her father finally accepted him. The second relief hit. The prince only murmured that he was happy. She leaned down, met his eyes with a warm, blushing smile, and told him he'd done amazingly, so Rudolph looked up, cheeks tinting, and blurted out a simple, heartfelt thank you. His gratitude met a breath of silence, and in the calm that followed, he rested peacefully in her care. Under the full moon, somewhere deep in the estate, Maid Maya gripped her fist so tight rage nearly burst out of her. She screamed in bitter frustration that she'd been dying to make it to Lisbeth's birthday party. Her rage finally drained out, and she crumpled over the desk, hollow and defeated because she'd been desperate to see the instant Prince Rudolph handed Lisbeth his birthday present, the exact gift she'd been told to fetch for him. In her head, she painted this sweet little moment Rudolph's mother, Beatrice, slipping a gorgeous aquamarine ring onto a younger version of the prince, and whispering that it looked perfect on him. Then Maya giggled in her own daydream, clutching that warm feeling like she'd finally found the one true treasure. Back in his room, the prince finally faced the truth he'd chosen differently. He pictured his maid, and he could almost hear her forgiveness as he begged for it in his head, but he still couldn't bring himself to hand over the gift. He just wanted to freeze in this moment, letting Lisbeth cradle his face a little longer as he stayed there, perfectly resting. 2 weeks have dragged by since the chaos of Lisbeth's birthday, and now, in a quiet garden gazebo, Prince Rudolph sits beside her with one heavy question hanging between them. Does she really want him here? During their meeting, Lisbeth's eyes lit up as she stared at a gorgeous star-shaped ring on her finger. Then she practically gushed her thanks to Prince Rudolph, swearing she'd treasure it forever. Maya stood right there, staring too, and said the ring was so perfect it had to be picked by some insanely talented maid. He'd planned to hand it to her on her birthday, but the timing went sideways, and he's still beating himself up about it. Lisbeth swats his apology away, saying the whole day was chaos, and Maya admits she was shocked to see him back with his face all swollen. And just like that, he can't hide his joy as he sees her again. Maya practically burst with excitement, admitting her heart was aching the whole time they were apart. She keeps staring between the prince and Lisbeth, completely swept up in the moment. Her shout bursts out of her mouth, then a sudden realization slams the brakes, and her face goes blank as she remembers she's not actually part of that couple. She clears her throat like a bell, ripping the couple's focus back to her in an instant. Then she snaps on a polished smile and asks Prince Rudolph what he's going to do from here on out. He leans forward, drops the smile, and turns dead serious, then tells them he's got something urgent to talk about, and that this time he'll need both of their help. Before he even starts, he jumps up from his seat and sweeps the room with sharp eyes. Then Maya calmly tells him he has nothing to fear because there's no one listening nearby. He sinks into his chair and weighs Maya's promise, knowing she might be right, but he still wants his enemies tuned in, and he makes it clear he plans to team up with someone from the royal family. He drops his shocking finale and declares he's ready to team up with one of his 3 older brothers, and Lisbeth is left completely stunned. It opens with the realm's political battlefield, starting with his 3 older brothers Frederick, loaded with crushing wealth and charisma, steering diplomacy and internal power like it can't be toppled. Oscar, the second queen's son, ruling the martial nobility and becoming even more dangerous than Frederick whenever war erupts, and Robin, tied by engagement to the Anderson family's daughter, since the Margravial House of Anderson patrols the western border and guards the trade routes everyone depends on. They're all chasing the throne, hunting for the power tied to the Farkrent family, the one with the Empire's mightiest army. He stared at his own reality and realized he'd had 0 power until he got engaged to Lisbeth. Now he's a major piece in the succession fight, and with one move, the balance between the 3 could swing hard. Lisbeth chews on the news, then snaps to the truth if the 3 princes team up with him. That's the fastest road to the throne. Maya, right at her side, turns and fires back, asking if he's going to use this new power to boost his status inside the imperial palace. He shuts down her guess immediately, leans back with his eyes closed, and says it straight, he wants nothing. No throne, no palace title. What he really craves is a partner who can keep him safe, and he makes it crystal clear he's got 0 ambitions of his own. Elizabeth snaps to what he's planning. This is why he was so nervous about spies earlier. He nods and says, if any of my brother's spies hear us, they'll go back and swear I've got 0 ambitions, and if they're curious, they'll come straight to me. But he cuts himself off, then Maya locks in with a determined stare and says there's no one here to hear him anyway. So she declares, that's exactly where I come in. He asks if he can hand the task to her, and she lights up with a huge, of course, 2 thumbs up like she's ready to go, and declares that spreading rumors is her specialty. Lisbeth watches her maid's wild energy and almost blinks in disbelief while Rudolph swivels back to Lisbeth and, with a guilty apology, admits he used her family's name like this. She waves it off, saying it's no big deal yet. The moment her eyes lock on him, you can tell something's wrong because she's really worried it sounds like he doesn't care about the throne at all. She leans in, eyes locked on him, and then if that's true, she presses him. So what's your plan for the future? He tells her he wants none of the imperial throne or royal prestige, just a little countryside land where he can finally live in peace. And that's exactly what he believed right after he crawled out of the poison. Then he looks her in the eyes, goes dead serious and admits, but now I feel differently. He tells Lisbeth his old plan won't work anymore because now he's got someone he has to protect. And just hiding in the countryside won't cut it. He knows folks will either try to exploit his power for themselves or come for his life, driven by fear. His face tightens with pure determination. He says he wants power, the kind that can stand up to any threat, protect everyone he cares about, and keep him safe too. While Lisbeth soaks in his confession in silence, Maya the maid breaks it with a quiet chuckle, then tells the prince his straight up the road he picked is brutal, and it won't be easy. Lisbeth doesn't hesitate. She throws her full support behind Rudolph, saying his eyes still burn with the kind of stubborn resolve that walks straight into thorns, and that she can see the same unbreakable heart he had back then. She leans in and tells him, you're going to make it. Everything's going to be okay, with absolute faith that he'll get through it. Then the story blasts open to the massive outside of the Zodiac Palace, the imperial family's power headquarters. In a towering throne room, Mark Douglas Farkrantz drops to his knees before the emperor, thanking him for granting an audience. But the emperor cuts through the politeness at once, glares down from the throne, and demands to know why he's really here. He spells it out. This is all about Prince Rudolph and his own daughter, Lisbeth. Then he leans in and tells the emperor they're both 14 and they'll be stepping into the Imperial Academy next year. Then he drops his formal request to glue things together. He wants Prince Rudolph to come stay at the Farkrant family residence. The Marquis goes on, saying if the prince is getting mistreated in that palace, his family can step in to protect him, and that a single year is more than enough to hammer the kid into shape. The emperor pauses just long enough to make it tense, then shuts the whole idea down with a harsh, simple refusal. I won't allow it. The room goes silent as the Marquis demands answers, and the Emperor slams the truth down with stone-cold certainty. Rudolph is still a prince of the Baldyke Empire, and he's not allowed to hide out as a guest in a vassal's home, case closed. He taps the Marquis again for his other reasons, and it just sits there, utterly silent, like it's judging his next word. Marquis's mind is sprinting because one thing he can't afford is losing his beloved son. Not when Beatrice would shatter, face first into heartbreak, and the idea of that foxwoman bearing her contempt makes him snort inside. When his first plan crashes, he pivots on the spot. Then he pushes a new idea. Let his daughter, Lisbeth, and a few of her attendants slip into the imperial palace and stay right beside Prince Rudolph. The emperor stared at the new request, wrestling with the gut-wrenching thought of throwing Lisbeth into the imperial palace's deadliest halls. But he refused to give up Prince Rudolph, the boy destined to be his future son-in-law. The Marquis leans in hard, insisting Lisbeth is tougher than the palace's cold air and won't be scared for a second. Then he shoots back that if he wants to train the prince, he can just show up every day and watch his vassals back him up. The emperor finally exhales a tired sigh, like he's got no choice but to give in. Curiosity hits him like a spark from the Marquis's unshakable certainty. He blurts out whether Prince Rudolph has proved he's worth that kind of devotion, and the Marquis shuts him down with a blunt, unwavering yes. That simple confirmation hits him like a wave suddenly. He remembers the emperor admits he's sparred with the prince just recently, and you can see it in his eyes, a flicker of surprise as he wonders out loud if throwing the boy against the infamous obsidian war demon might have been reckless. A confident grin cracks across the Marquis's face as he tells the emperor, no reckless move. Not even a hint this was done because His Majesty's attention was clearly sparked, and with the right guidance, Prince Rudolph is going to blow past even the Marquis's own legendary skill one day. A wave of triumph hits him. His gut feeling was right, so he decides the emperor must have seen Rudolph's incredible talent from day one. And then he whips his gaze toward the throne, bracing to catch the proud face of a father. But when he sees the emperor's face, it hits like a punch to the gut. No proud father smiling. Just a cold, dark intensity staring back, and his triumphant realization shatters in a single horrible breath. His thoughts spun when the emperor's dark expression hit him. He couldn't make sense of it. If His Majesty really knew about Rudolph's gift, why didn't he nurture it for the royal family? Instead, he had so many ways to back his son, even training him to become a knight and guard the other princes. Then the emperor let out a low, chilling laugh, and the Marquis dropped the news that he was leaving. Just as he spun to leave, the emperor's voice snapped him back. About his daughter, the ruler said it cold and clear. Lord Farkrantz would owe him one. The Marquis stiffened, and the favor's weight slammed down on his shoulders. He stormed out of the throne room and tore down that long, sunlit colonnade, slamming his hand into a stone pillar as fury burst through him. Damn it! He spat the curse into the empty hall. He rushed forward, panic hammering his thoughts. Prince Rudolph was getting mistreated on purpose. And that only raised one terrifying question. Why would his own father, the emperor, treat him with such cold contempt? The cold truth hit him like a brick. Turns out the one who brushed off the talented prince, the one who let him get mocked at every turn, wasn't some mystery villain at all. It was the emperor himself, jaw clenched, already marching toward a grim decision. And once the Marquis saw that, he knew he couldn't wait. He'd have to cook up a move of his own. Meanwhile, back at the prince's residence, Rudolph leaned in and casually asked Lisbeth, "So is it really okay for you to stay that long?" They sat side by side in a garden gazebo, and he blurted out his worry that her father might be stressing over her long visit. Lisbeth snapped her eyes up, shocked for a split second. She grinned and soothed him, insisting everything was totally fine. And then, with a bright smile, she announced she'd be moving into this place starting today. Her attendant burst into delighted shrieks, bragging that Lisbeth's room was already cleaned and fully redecorated. But Maya went still, stunned stiff, and whipped around to the prince to demand if he'd known about this whole setup. It hit him completely off guard. He demanded to know why Maya hadn't told him, and the maid quickly apologized, saying she thought it would be a hassle. Lisbeth followed with her own apology, swearing it wasn't her intention, while her attendant just smiled and chirped that it was all a big, happy surprise. Elsewhere in the palace, Prince Robin sat at a wrecked dining table as his henchmen closed in, and his attendant hurried over to say he'd be meeting Ashila Sama the very next afternoon about clothes and gifts. Then Robin exploded, snapped that this was nothing but trivial noise, and ordered him to just pick something before delivering a chilling warning, ask again, and he'd kill him. The henchman recoiled in pure terror. He sprawled at the table, casually wiping his mouth with a napkin, while his attendant crouched by his feet, just itching to hear this rumor his brother was suddenly into romance and hunting for a fiancée. And then he snapped, demanding to know if anyone had some juicy dirt on the one he called Pig Rudolph. His attendant blurted out an apology with a stammer, but another servant cut in and dropped the bombshell. Prince Rudolph was already engaged to the Farkrantz family's daughter. The prince scoffed, daring anyone to believe they'd actually want to marry someone like that. Then, since he didn't even know the name, he demanded to know where the family came from. His attendant finally dropped the bombshell that they were from the high and mighty Douglas Salma house, and that's when Robin just froze. Stunned, that shock curdled into a storm of rage. He slammed a brutal kick into the table. Everything toppled and crashed onto the floor, and it smashed into his servant. Then he bellowed that the filthy pig was getting way too cocky for setting up a match with a family that mattered this much. When Robin's rage finally hit its peak, a dark-haired young woman just watched him, smiling faintly, like she already knew how this would end. Robin's face burned red with fury as he swore he would crush his brother, wreck Rudolph's engagement no matter the cost. And right then a devil's grip crept toward the fourth prince. In the bright palace corridor, Prince Rudolph slams on the brakes, panic spiking as Lisbeth Farkrantz stands right there, smiling and calling out a warm good morning, so flustered that all he can do is stammer back a shaky greeting. In the dead hush right after the charge, Lisbeth had just barely moved into the palace. She'd been there for only a day, and this stay was supposed to last the whole year, yet the silence in their minds is anything but real. Lisbeth's head spins as she's sure Prince Rudolph is just too perfect, staring at his silver hair blazing in the sun and his amber eyes, daring to hope she might be the happiest girl alive at the same time. Rudolph is just as hooked, convinced Lisbeth is stunning, drinking in how her dark hair pops against her pale skin as he thinks over and over that he has got to be the luckiest guy in the world. The way they're staring at each other like that is way too intense, too early in the morning. Their hearts feel like they're about to explode, and they both silently freak out at the exact same time. Later at the breakfast table, one lonely cooked carrot sits abandoned on an otherwise spotless plate. Rudolph's the one doing it then. Maya strides up with hands on her hips, and boom! She asks if he's leaving his carrots again. He groans and swears it's not a big deal to leave, just one or two. He snaps back hard, scolding him that he'll never grow big and strong if he won't eat right, and that he better stop leaving food behind. Rudolph grumbles that he's not a kid anymore, and from the side, the steward tells the chef that His Highness has seriously calmed down. Stewart leans in and says the poison attempt changed the prince completely, like he's a whole new person now, and the chef nods, praising Maya for holding her ground, while he remembers the old days when the prince would fire any cook who dared slip carrots into his food. Noticing the whole exchange, Lisbeth lifts a carrot on her fork, freezes the moment, and demands the truth. So since we got engaged, you've changed, haven't you? And you don't like carrots, Prince Rudolph. With a soft smile, Lisbeth shrugs it off and promises she'll take what's left, saying the chef would much rather have someone actually enjoy the food, just as Maya tries to object, and Lisbeth shuts her down, spoiling him instead. Rudolph can't even find words at her kindness, while the chef just watches, flooded with relief and gratitude. He slams his fist onto the table with a thunderous thud, face twisted in pure disgust. Then Maya, the steward, and the chef flinch hard, stunned by the sudden outburst. Even though the prince doesn't react how you'd expect, the chef breaks into applause for Lisbeth, stunned that Prince Rudolph truly chomped down on a carrot, calling it a straight-up miracle, while Lisbeth just smiles like she's quietly basking in it. The maids, Maya and her colleague, breathe out in relief as they watch Prince Rudolph soak up the moment, grinning like he's won everything, because with Lisbeth as his fiancée, they're sure his joy is finally going to be safe and steady. The chef finally lets out a breath of pure relief. He wasn't fired, and he can't stop thinking about that brutal downsizing. When Maya had to cut nearly half the staff who'd been dragging the prince's name through the mud. Later, once the meal's over and the room's finally cleared out, Rudolph's voice cuts through the silence as he calls Lisbeth's name. He strides up to her and asks if she wants to take a walk, teasing that he's got a place he can't wait to show her. Then he blurts out that she should only come if she's not too exhausted. But Lisbeth's flustered, bright red with embarrassment, and she agrees on the spot, practically vibrating with excitement, saying a walk sounds absolutely lovely. They stroll off side by side, and Lisbeth can barely hold back inside. She's screaming with joy that His Highness actually invited her out. Rudolph, meanwhile, keeps stealing glances back with a faint blush, fretting that his invitation might have come off weird. He guides her onto the palace grounds, right into a gorgeous garden, and Lisbeth raises a parasol to shield the blazing sun while Maya watches from afar, her face going soft as she takes in the place they've come to. Rudolph asks if she remembers, and she nods through tears spilling up in her eyes. Lisbeth blurts that the place hasn't changed one bit, because this was right here, 9 years ago, where they first met. That line of trees still stands there, dead quiet like nothing has changed in all those years, holding on to every shared memory they've watched together. Her mind snaps back 9 years, to a sun-drenched day where petals drifted like magic, and there's a younger Rudolph, smiling so hard it's contagious, tugging her by the hand and dragging her through the garden as they run. He guided her into a sunlit clearing, and together they knelt in the flowers. Then he carefully braided a crown of white blossoms for her while she cradled one single stem, smiling softly as she watched him. A simple gift lit up both their faces, and for one brief moment, they just shared pure, sparkling joy. The memory slips away, and they snap back to the here and now. Rudolph even points out that it's time to return, cracking that Maya should have tea ready. Lisbeth nods, then suddenly freezes because she realizes she's left her parasol behind. Before she can decide what to do, Rudolph grins and cheerfully offers to dash out and fetch it for her. He swings around and strides back along the stone path, leaving Lisbeth stuck waiting by the garden entrance. And somehow he looks totally fine with it, like he's genuinely glad to help. His peaceful stroll gets yanked to a stop by a voice he never wanted to hear. Prince Robin is right there, sneering like he owns the sky, calling it pure coincidence to find a filthy pig wandering in such a place. And Rudolph is left frozen, stunned, wondering why his own brother is showing up when he was supposed to be rotting under house arrest. Robin slams into the distance, a threat in his eyes, and brushes off Rudolph's question like it's nothing, then leans in close with pure venom to taunt him about the one thing Rudolph just couldn't keep to himself, his engagement. He stays cool on the outside, but inside his mind is sprinting. He knew one of his brothers would strike sooner or later, and of course it's Robin. First he snaps to it fast. Robin wants to secure the Farcran's house by setting him up, all in return for backing off and refusing to turn this violent. Rudolph's eyes go wide as his brother's face crumples into a slick, predatory grin, barking the demand like it's nothing. Hand her over your fiancé. Rudolph can't believe the nerve, so he interrogates Robin, flat out asking if he's cheating before the wedding, since his brother already has a fiancé. Robin just scoffs, saying royalty having concubines is nothing new, and that Rudolph, son of a concubine himself, has no right to stand on a high horse. He stood his ground, while his brother, Prince Robin, raged on his face, twisting into a crazy manic grin as Robin snapped that Rudolph, the filthy pig, wouldn't get a single thing for himself, not even his fiancée. He hissed that he was staking his claim on her and swore he'd never let that wedding happen. Rudolph stared at his brother's sneering face, disgust burning hot in his chest. This was the third prince, Robin, and the truth was far uglier than he ever imagined. Robin was plain, dim-witted, and downright vile. Once it clicked, he stayed cool and said, "That's enough." He finally got it. Robin didn't care about snagging the military power of House Fargrants. He just couldn't stand Rudolph's status climbing. And that rage boiled over at the answer Robin fired back, asked if he was really going to mouth off, then surged forward with a roar. "No, this is a little brother showdown now, pig. Brace yourself." Prince Robin charges at Prince Rudolph with a vicious snarl, and just as he's about to make contact, Lisbeth darts in fast, yanks the umbrella handle around Robin's ankle, and yanks him off balance mid-draw. That hook on her umbrella yanks him right off his feet, and Rudolph and Maya just stare as the third prince slams face first into the stone path with a brutal thud. Then he's coughing, gasping, and struggling to catch his breath. He heaves himself upright, face smashed and bleeding, then demands she finally realizes he's the third prince, while Lisbeth stays icy calm, Pretending she's worried, she swears he just slipped and fell, acts shocked, and then introduces herself as the eldest daughter of the Farkrant family and Rudolph's fiancée. Her sweet act drops in a heartbeat. Rage sharpens her eyes as she leans in and spits a terrifying promise. If Prince Rudolph gets hurt, she'll kill him. Then her face flips into a sudden, sugary smile as she admits that's just how fiercely she loves him. And with a grin, she declares she can't wait for their queens. In the middle of that confrontation, they rush in and find Prince Robin sprawled, knocked out cold from the fall, while his attendant bolts to his side and Rudolph and Lisbeth immediately turn around and head back to Scorpio Palace. Right there, they get hit with the full fury of Maid Maya. She's standing in Rudolph's study, fists tight, and she's demanding to know why both of them ditched her. Lisbeth shoots out a quick, soothing apology, saying she only wanted the two of them together today, and then swears Maya can join them next time Rudolph watches the truth slipping through Lisbeth's smile. Meanwhile, Maya grumbles that if she'd been there, Prince Robin would have never gotten anywhere near Rudolph, and admits she just realized she missed something really interesting. Rudolph sits at his desk and snaps the conversation back to politics. This whole incident kills any chance of joining hands with Prince Robin. Even though Rudolph insists Robin was never really on the table anyway, since Robin has already thrown his lot in with their older brother, Prince Frederick. She admits the politics play a role, but makes it clear the real spark was Robin trying to hurt her. Then Lisbeth turns to Rudolph and asks which brother he's going to team up with, pushing Prince Oscar, the second prince, as the obvious pick. Rudolph stares at her like she's missing the point, shuts down her idea, and with pure determination declares it, he's not aiming for Oscar at all. He's locked onto Frederick, the first prince. His big declaration hits the room like a brick, and everyone freezes in confusion. Maya fires back, blunt as a punch. If we ally with Prince Frederick, that means we're basically partnering with Prince Robin too. Lisbeth recoils in disgust, horrified at the idea of teaming up with that scumbag. From his desk, he shoots back in a calm voice, telling them it'll all be fine because he finally gets the real tension between those brothers. Then he drops the bomb that Robin is wrapped up in twisted jealousy and a brutal inferiority complex toward Frederick. And Lisbon's stunned out of his chair. He breaks down the whole reason this gets so complicated. Frederick is simply in another league, glowing with brilliance, packed with talent, and backed by charisma that steamrolls every room. Meanwhile, their mother, or say, their mother, First Empress Alicia, showers her gifted older son with praise and refuses to trust Robin, leaving Robin's emotional ground shaky because the only way he can keep his pride from collapsing is by clinging to someone beneath him. He turns to the stunned women and fires a brutal question. What happens if the guy Robin has always treated as less than finally joins hands with Frederick? The thought instantly cracks Robin's fragile pride, because if that happens, he'll lose the only person he's been using to prop up his ego. Maya lets out a soft wah, and Lisbeth snaps into the plan, realizing Robin could never survive being stuck under Rudolph in the wood, and that if Rudolph's rage truly boils, he'll likely lash out at his own brother, Frederick. Rudolph then confirms, point for point, that she's dead on. Lisbeth stays unconvinced, digs into the plan's too simple feel, and challenges Frederick why pick an alliance with a fourth prince over his own brother. He stays cool and says it's exactly because of her father, Lord Farkrantz, that Frederick will go for that alliance. Still, Lisbeth won't let it go and demands to know how he can be so sure. His answer hits like a straight punch. Prince Frederick doesn't have a single ounce of military power of his own. He takes a sip, then grimaces as the scalding heat burns his tongue. Then he lays bare the empire's political chessboard. Frederick rules with crushing power at the center, but the second prince, Oscar, has the real edge military muscle backed by a whole army of border lords. And just like that, the throne war drags on in a deadly standoff. So Frederick makes a desperate move. He has to seize Lord Farkrant's unmatched fighting power to solidify his grip. Listening to this razor-sharp breakdown of the Empire's power plays, Lisbeth is utterly stunned. Then a soft blush blooms across her cheeks. Her shock flips straight into praise. Maya can't stop raving that he analyzed both sides so perfectly, it feels like he was there, watching it happen with his own eyes. And when Lisbeth jumps in, Rudolph's confidence cracks into a cold, nervous sweat as he panics inside. He'll never be able to say where his knowledge really comes from, because he's already lived this future. He finishes his explanation and tells them he'll just wait it out patiently until his brother, Frederick, makes the first move, and Lisbeth and Maya, clearly thrown off, nod like they finally got it. He whips around to face Maya and blurts out a thank you for saving his life. And she's so flustered, she clutches her hands, begging him never to risk himself like that again, swearing she'll train harder too and get even stronger. Her resolve snaps into full power, and she blares that there's nothing to worry about because she's been training the right way until her sudden outburst leaves Rudolph totally stunned. Elsewhere, a brutal premonition hits out of nowhere, and an unseen soul is slammed with dread, praying like crazy that nothing terrible is about to happen. Beneath a sky packed with stars, a colossal palace looms like a fortress, its dark silhouette cutting through the night. Inside those walls, a long, ornate hallway stretches in deadly silence, dust motes swirling like tiny ghosts in the faint, ghostly light. The dead silence snaps as a man steps in, his eyes blazing with a furious heat, sweat pouring as rage boils. It's Prince Robin, hidden in a dark, hooded cloak, standing alone in that corridor, while rage makes his whole body shake. He finally gives in, admits Lisbeth really is stuck living with that pig bastard Rudolph in the Scorpio Palace, then snaps orders to someone we can't see keep eyes on her and grab a copy of the key. He even clocks the timeline. She'll stay there until she enrolls in the Imperial Academy next year. He grips the brand new key and declares Rudolph and his fiancée unforgivable, then slips into a pitch-black bedroom. One looming silhouette framed by the doorway swearing that what's Rudolph's now becomes his. He lunges in and growls as he pins Lisbeth to the bed, then declares loud and clear that he's about to show her who really outranks who between them. In a dim, dusty bedroom, Prince Rudolph stares over the sleeping Lisbeth Farkrantz when a chilling thought slams into the room. This is your fault, Rudolph. That silent threat keeps creeping closer. His hand reaches for her face, and then a ruthless promise hits, I'll crush everything you hold dear. Lisbeth's eyes snap open out of nowhere, and in one smooth, lightning-fast strike, she punches the man looming over her, a Rudolph doppelganger, sending him crashing back as blood erupts from his mouth. She whips in a devastating high kick, sending the imposter flying across the room to slam hard into the far wall. Her face tightens the second she looks down at her own forearm. Fresh blood spills from a cut she made herself. With one sharp flick of her wrist, she flings blood at her crumpled enemy, and it erupts into a violent explosion of raw power. The imposter's face is smashed into a swollen, bruised wreck. Muffled groans are all he can manage. Later in another room, the real Prince Rudolph stands beside Lisbeth, watching three captured men kneel on the floor. Then he smirks and tells her, with total satisfaction, that he warned her it would all run perfectly smooth. He jabs a finger at two of the men, those sneaky guards from the palace entrance, and the bound prisoners, shaking with terror, start begging for their lives. Maya strides forward and explains they were saved because she'd clocked those men snooping around. Then she flashes a smile and shuts down the praise, saying it all comes down to the prince's sharp, exact instructions. 9 days back, he was locked at his desk when he spotted palace infiltrators creeping in like rats, and his maid Maya snapped, "Leave it to me," offering to exterminate them. But he had a whole new plan. He told Maya to let them go, daring them to act on their own so a real opening could form, and so Robin's true goal would finally show itself. Now, in the present, Rudolph snaps that the second he heard their target was Lisbeth's chamber. Rage flooded his veins. Right nearby, a bound Prince Robin fights in vain, while Lisbeth and her attendant just watch. Robin's furious, muffled screams tear through the room as he blasts his brother, calling him a bastard, while a kneeling retainer beside him snaps. Asking if Rudolph thinks he can just get away with this, the prince watches without a face, and Maya begs him to stop. The retainer keeps raging, and the truth spills out. He says they were against this plan from day one, and they'd been shouting nonstop that Prince Robin must stop picking a fight with Rudolph and just stick to his own job. Words alone torch the captive prince even more. Robin thrashes to silence his own man, snarling that a servant has no right to mouth off to him. The retainer fires back that he only snatched the key because they thought they'd just scare Rudolph, not turn it into an assault. Robin raises the threat to kill, and then a venomous idea strikes him. Lisbeth would be way better off with Robin than with that pig, Rudolph. Those arrogant thoughts of the prince slam into Lisbeth like a threat, and her face turns pitch dark, an icy plan snapping into place. Help him and make sure this idiot never causes another mistake. Maya feels the danger instantly, barges in and begs her to stop, even as she admits the idea tempts her. The whole room goes so tense Rudolph even flinches. A calmer voice slices through the tension, insisting this brutal risk isn't necessary, and then it pushes the clear move hand Prince Robin straight to the Emperor. The fallout from his choices is going to crush him, because for a man already engaged, trying to assault his younger brother's fiancée isn't just wrong, it's scandal on a whole other level. They'll rip up his engagement, and then he's staring down years behind bars, or worse, banishment from the imperial family. Even with the punishment looming, Lisbeth can't shake the worry. She fires off a question to Rudolph, demanding to know if he's truly okay with this. He just smirks and tells her the same thing: as long as his brother is out of sight, that's all that matters. Then he adds that the real win is keeping her safe and unharmed, but that easy, carefree grin only makes Lisbeth more unsettled. His focus snaps to the captured retainers, Robin's men, and you can tell they were forced to play along, because their punishment is going to be way worse than anything the prince they serve is facing. Prince Rudolph tore through the doors, panic blazing across his face as he yelled that this was bad, so bad it could even end in death. Then Lisbeth jumped back, blinking, and demanded, "What's wrong?" Before Rudolph can even speak, the doors slam open behind him, and out steps a regal woman, flanked by 2 attendants. She smiles at Rudolph coolly and declares, "I'm First Empress Alicia, mother of Robin and Frederick." Rudolph, Lisbeth, and her attendant freeze, stunned speechless by her sudden arrival. He immediately figures she learned everything through her spies, but she shows up way sooner than he ever expected, so he steels himself, straightens up, and formally greets Empress Alicia, asking what brought her to his palace. She smirks like she owns the room, says she caught the noise and can't help wondering what that scream was about. Then her voice turns razor sharp as she snaps at him to look, straight up calling him a pig. Her face tightens into a ruthless glare, and she warns Prince Rudolph that whatever he says next could stain his credibility for good. He swings his gaze away for a split second, realizing she already knows Robin's here, and that she's made the first move. Not him. Elizabeth demands answers, and Rudolph fires back that, as the Scorpio Palace's administrator, any trouble that erupts is his burden to own. Then he snaps back to the Empress, ready to lay the truth bare. He realizes this is his moment to seize the upper hand, and he launches into his explanation, saying a rat slipped into the palace last night, wreaked havoc, terrorized his guards, and they only finally caught it after a brutal fight. Then nods like we all should get the hidden message, and the Empress steps in, asking him to hand that pesky little rat over to her. He quietly nods, locking in her plan rescue Robin. He knows this won't be easy, but instead of panicking, he flips the script, thinking it's just like trying to keep a new pet in a cancer palace. He refuses to back down, firing back at Empress Alicia that this whole mess is his fault to handle, because if he just lets the rat slip away, he'll have nothing to explain to the Emperor, so he's stuck defending his choice. But Alicia shoots back with calm certainty, promising she'll take the rat herself, and swears His Majesty will understand the moment she's the one delivering the explanation. He clocked her shameless nerve, and if he hands Robin over that easily, the whole thing gets buried, leaving his retainer's fate hanging in the air. So he snaps and chooses a totally different move. He stands before the First Empress and raises 3 fingers, declaring, "I've got 3 requests for you, hear me out, and I'll hand over the rat, Prince Robin." Empress Alicia breaks into amused laughter, teasing that 3 requests already sound a little too greedy, while Lisbeth and her attendant freeze in shock, realizing Rudolph is dangling Prince Robin like a bargaining chip. He stared straight into her eyes and swore it isn't greed, he's the one gambling here by agreeing to her demands, and he's betting she'll see his terms as generous. After a tense beat of silence, the Empress finally caves. She nods, agrees to hear him out, and demands to know what he wants. He makes his first demand: Prince Robin stays far from the Scorpio Palace, or trouble won't stop, and then hits them with a second. The Empress must act like the whole incident never happened. The Empress agrees to the first, but doubts the second. So Rudolph steps in and makes it crystal clear. Everyone is to go on as if nothing has changed. She explains that even the men from the Taurus Palace, Robin, and his retainers, who are tied up right now, must be handled like nothing at all is happening. He warns that wiping people out just for serving Robin would be a horrific fate, and before anyone can blink, the Empress calls it surprisingly brilliant, nods at his second request, and thanks him. She leans in and demands his last request, praying it'll land the same way as the first two mutual benefits and no fallout because she can see his plan outsmarts trouble, keeping Robin's other retainers from getting dragged into unnecessary conflict. And that's a win for her too. His mood flips the second he starts talking. Darkness sweeps over his face and he tells Empress Alicia, like she already knows, that he can't shake the feeling that he doesn't belong in this palace. She insists it's only natural someone like him gets hated. Then he fires back his mom wasn't anything more than the emperor's concubine, yet she still demanded inheritance rights for her illegitimate son, then had the nerve to ask for a priceless jewel like it was owed to her. With a deep breath, Prince Rudolph squares up against Empress Alicia and blurts out an apology for being indirect, but she doesn't soften for a second. She goes right for the jugular, demanding to know, word for word, Ayasham, word for word, what he's truly asking for. He admits he's always known his place, confessing he once craved a quiet life, far from the crushing weight of the throne. Then a flicker of memory hits, and Lisbeth surfaces as he tells her, "Don't worry, I've got this." As he keeps talking, he tells the truth. His engagement to Lisbeth has already locked in Marquis Farkrantz's backing, and that's exactly why his third request exists. He wants to use this power to finally patch things up with his estranged brother. The ultimate goal, he declares, is to play the peacemaker between them so I can forge an alliance with Frederick. Then Rudolph spins to walk away while the Empress turns inward and thinks, I came for a rat, but I got these huge demands straight from the prince. A quiet, amused smile curls on her lips. She says she'll grant every one of his requests, so Rudolph flashes a thank you, even as he secretly laughs at the thought of a cold-blooded monster like Frederick ever feeling kindness. And the Empress insists Frederick will be thrilled, because he's always been looking out for Rudolph. He gets ready to leave, then the Empress shuts the moment down, grabs his attention, and asks if she can hand the rat situation to him. He nods without hesitation, and she leans in to fire off one last question. Rudolph is asked what he thinks of his mother, and he snaps back instantly, ice cold, saying he feels nothing at all, that she's just her and he's just him, then turns and strides off, leaving the Empress to stare after him like she's finally understood. Prince Robin whips his fist down in a raging slam, jolting Lisbeth and her attendant out of their seats. Then he roars that Rudolph is behind it and that he'll never, ever go along with the scheme. His outburst ricochets through the hall, and he storms off like a storm cloud, leaving Lisbeth and her attendant standing there, stunned, with worried looks fixed on his retreat. In a quiet, sun-drenched courtyard, two figures clash with swords, cutting through the greenery as stone arches loom overhead. Then the camera swings out to reveal the grand castle where every political move and personal grudge is about to explode. He snaps his wooden sword up to block Marquis Farkrantz's crushing strike, face straining as the Marquis spits out a comment about the terrible luck the young prince has endured. Then Rudolph digs in and fights to answer, swearing he asks about Empress Alicia, and the Marquis blurts the news she already shipped his brother, Prince Robin, straight to the academy dormitory. The scoreboard snaps shut on his last move too soft, then he whips a brutal downward swing and obliterates Rudolph's wooden sword, sending the pieces flying apart with a vicious crack. With his weapon shattered, Rudolph crumples onto the ground, crushed, defeated. The Marquis blares that today's training is done, and the prince meekly nods, conceding it. This training is brand new, and ever since Lisbeth arrived, Marquis Farkrantz himself has been drilling Rudolph in swordsmanship, because for the prince, this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to get strong enough to shield Lisbeth with his own two hands. Later, over tea, Rudolph spirals in guilt over how he wasted the Marquis' time, especially when he's still barely strong enough. He steels himself and swears he'll grind harder, pushing to get stronger at last, then calls out to the Marquis like he's renewing his vow right there. Lisbeth's attendant leans in close and lays out the grim politics once Empress Alicia showed up. They had no choice but to hand over Lord Robin if they'd tossed him over with no terms. They'd be branded as fools. And without concessions, war was guaranteed. So Lisbeth nods and swears her attendant is telling the truth. She and Lisbeth push their case with raw force, And Rudolph just stared at the table quietly saying he already knows, so they don't need to spell it out for him. The Marquis snaps him out, and his face turns grim as he fires off, asking Lisbeth if she thinks he's mad that his name is being used as leverage in their negotiation, because it's the exact opposite. He even clocked how fiercely Prince Rudolph threw himself into his swordsmanship lessons. Then he bursts into a booming laugh, and that strict, serious vibe just disappears like it never existed. He's practically ecstatic that His Highness is improving this fast. Rudolph freezes, completely stunned by the confession. Rudolph slid into the seat opposite Marquis Farkrantz as the man opened a dangerous topic, saying he'd heard the prince had the right to rule, but zero interest in the throne. Rudolph blinked in shock, then admitted, "Yeah, that's exactly right." He laid out his answer and backed it up, saying the Marquis was right, and making it crystal clear this wasn't some reluctance to rule, but a total, absolute disinterest in the imperial family itself. He quietly cursed his own luck. Sure, the only thing that made him valuable was his tie to the imperial bloodline. Nothing else. He figured the Marquis had to notice some benefit in his royal name. But deep down, he feared he couldn't live up to those hopes. So he just swallowed the guilt and prayed for forgiveness in silence. The Marquis, though, looked downright pleased. He chuckled to himself like this was even better. And while Rudolph stared in confusion, the Marquis started laying out something the prince might not know. He dropped a game-changing truth. Besides Lisbeth, the House of Farkrantz had no heirs in sight at all. They'd even been eyeing an adoption from a branch family. But then Rudolph and her got engaged, and suddenly the Marquis's focus snapped to the prince, like a bold plan forming right on his lips. That question hit like a punch. Would he really step into the Farkrantz family, joining them as their adopted son-in-law? His eyes went wide the moment the offer hit him, because marrying into the Marquis household would erase his imperial status and set him free. He started to blurt out his doubts, then, boom, a booming laugh from the Marquis cut him off, and the prince fired back, asking whether someone like him could really get away with this, admitting he was a weak man with nothing worth bringing to the table. The Marquis fired back, praising the prince's sharp instincts and quick adaptability, even this early in training, and confidently claimed Rudolph would outmatch every swordsman his age in just 6 months if he kept up discipline and strength. Building the prince instantly panicked, brushed it off as nothing but flattery. His face snapped serious as he swore only when it comes to martial skill, he speaks nothing but the truth. And Lisbeth, who'd been quiet the whole time, nodded along, saying her father was right. Lisbeth's attendant gushes that Prince Rudolph has a gentle heart and real mercy. And as Lisbeth adds that his negotiations with Empress Alicia were brilliant, she leans in and swears with total confidence that before long he'll outclass even her father as a swordsman. The Marquis hammers their point home, making the prince know both he and his daughter see no worthless lie here. And with his chest tight, Rudolph can only squeeze out a choked, emotional thank you. As a ribbon slips from her hair, Lisbeth stares at him through tears, begging him to stop calling himself worthless, because to her, he's irreplaceable. Her heartfelt words finally smash through his defenses, and one trembling tear slips down his cheek. He tilts his head up at them, and a real smile bursts across his face as the Marquis slides a comforting hand over his head. Rudolph swears this is the first time he's finally found his true family. Under a blazing full moon, a whole new scene crashes to life at Sauvelier Manor down a dark, empty hallway. A sob strangles the silence. Over a coffin inside, the Sauvelier family's second son seethes, demanding to know why Patrick had to be the one to die, while grief detonates into rage as memories of their father's favoritism flood back and shatter him, because their dad always doted on Patrick and left him out in the cold. Now that his brother's gone, he's the heir, and a vicious thought burns in his mind. If only Wilhelm had died instead. His resentment finally breaks him open. Then a brutal memory slams into his mind, where his father's face twists in raw shock as the axe crashes down and drops him. Once his way was cleared, the Sauvelier's son cackled like a madman, swearing he'd become a hero whose name gets carved into history, and he promised he'd never fail. He was dead certain, because he held a book stuffed with secrets about a past nobody else even knew existed. 3 months after the talks with Empress Alicia, Prince Rudolph's training with Lisbeth has gone into overdrive. He throws himself onto the ground, gasping after their sparring session. Even though exhaustion crushes him, he still manages to admit it. Thanks to her and his father, he's gotten stronger. While they finally catch their breath, Maya strides up and hypes them both for the practice swings. Then she hands the prince an ornate, wax-sealed envelope. She tells him a letter has arrived, and the second Rudolph sees that seal, his eyes widen. It's from Empress Alicia. Lisbeth tears open the letter and asks what it's really about, betting it's a peace offer to Prince Frederick. And Rudolph just nods. She's right. The note isn't pleasantries at all. It's an invitation to the Imperial New Year celebration. Right there at the palace that same week, determination flashes in Rudolph's eyes as the truth hits. This is it. He's finally going to meet his older brother. Tonight's celebration is here beneath a crescent moon. The towering Zodiac Palace looms, waiting to welcome the Empire's nobility. Inside a towering vaulted hall, elegant guests crowd the space nobles from every corner of the land, swapping secrets and rumors as the air crackles with raw anticipation. In the crush of the crowd, Farkrant's family and their allies snap their heads around all at once, because a thunderous voice just roared out for every single person to listen. Up high on the balcony, Emperor Karl I Baldyke lifts his glass to the crowd, thanking them for squeezing into their hectic schedules, then inviting everyone to toast the dawn of a brand new year for the Baldyke Empire. His speech keeps rolling as he points down toward the massive entrance, and then boom, he declares he's bringing in his beloved family and demands the whole crowd roar them in with applause. While the crowd erupts in applause, two regal women step forward and start their grand descent. First comes Empress Alicia, and right after her, Katerina, the second empress, is formally introduced. One of them strides forward, her heels snapping like gunfire in the hall. Then a breathy, intrigued "oh my" hangs in the air. Right when the court finally started to settle, a loud, flamboyant entrance tore through the room. Beatrice, the emperor's beloved concubine, breezed in late and smiled like nothing happened, apologizing that she couldn't get her makeup right. The other noble women froze in shock, then muttered in disgust about her vulgarity and how she was dragging the royal family's dignity through the mud. As whispers about Beatrice rippled through the hall, two towering powerhouses strode in, boom, every eye snapped to them at once. Their arrival blew open a fresh storm of whispers. Some nobles were quick to label them as First Prince Frederick, all charm and top marks from the Imperial Academy, while Second Prince Oscar got praised as even more handsome and a deadlier swordsman than his older brother. The chatter also circled Prince Robin's absence and the sudden cancellation of Oscar's engagement, a hit everyone said Empress Alicia had struggled to swallow. Right on cue, another couple stormed in and snatched everyone's attention. Prince Rudolph swaggered in, hand-locked with Lisbeth Farkrantz, and the crowd erupted, shouting that the engagement rumors were true. Of course, some people sneered and demanded why the mighty Farkrantz family would pair up with a guy like him, but others couldn't ignore the truth, and after the assassination attempt, Rudolph had changed, finally becoming someone with real character. He caught every whisper and every cruel jab about the prostitute's son being dragged into the royal family, and once they saw him starting to gain real power, their faces turned pale with terror at what he'd do next. Rumors didn't stop. Some nobles even whispered that Rudolph might get adopted into the Farkrant family, because if that happened, he'd lose his right to the throne, and the empire's dignity would be kept safe. The courtroom buzzed with one burning question: where would Prince Rudolph throw his weight? Every time he picked between Prince Frederick's faction or Prince Oscar's, the fragile balance among the heirs to the throne would tip, and the whole power map would instantly redraw. As they kept moving, Rudolph leaned in and told Lisbeth in a low voice that those nasty rumors about her being his intended were spreading thanks to Maya's push, and he ordered her to watch every one of his moves. Far off, First Empress, Alicia stared at them with a cold, hard look. With every eye locked on him, he figured the plan had to ignite any second. Then Lisbeth met his gaze, sharp and focused, and right as the tension peaked, someone nearby shouted his name. As Rudolph's giant-sized brother, Prince Oscar, strode up with a drink, Oscar raised his cup and congratulated him on the engagement. Rudolph thanked him, then introduced his fiancée, Lisbeth Farkrantz, who gave a calm, polite greeting. He reaches out with a glass of red wine and tells Rudolph, "Come on, talk to me for a second," then adds with a grin that his younger brother is surely old enough to drink now. Rudolph politely refuses to apologize to his brother, claiming he's already booked. And just as he says it, the first empress, Alicia, sweeps in and confirms Prince Frederick is waiting. She motions for Rudolph to follow, and he shoots Oscar one last heartfelt apology before he goes. As he spins to leave, Rudolph silently mouths a thank you to his brother for the perfect assist. His public refusal hits the gathered nobles like a thunderclap. Whispers erupt as they realize what it means. Even Rudolph, the one nobody ever truly paid attention to, gets pulled aside by his own brother and gets shut down hard because Frederick's name gets thrown in instead. The message couldn't be clearer. Rudolph has just hooked up with the Frederick faction. He keeps moving, thinking, once this news hits the streets, maybe my awful reputation finally starts to crack, and I'll be one step closer to that calm life I've been chasing. Lisbeth keeps pace beside him and fires off a question. Does he feel any guilt for saying no to Oscar? Rudolph shrugs it off, saying his brother's invitation was just politics, so his own political refusal doesn't leave a drop of guilt on his hands. Meanwhile, from his balcony high over the hall, Prince Frederick spots his brother Oscar closing in and lets out a smug grin, openly mocking him for that brutal rejection he just faced. Later, Oscar sits down with his mother, Empress Katerina, and lays it all out. He swears he's not just being pessimistic, but still points out that the old Rudolph would have never handled something this politically sharp. So Oscar decides this. Rudolph isn't the same person anymore. And if that thought makes anything clearer, it's this. He wants his brother on his side even more than before. His calm snaps in half, and pure manic ambition takes over his face. Then he spills the real terrifying plan to carve out his own conquest. He'll wipe out the royal family, amber eyes burning like a curse. Around a grand dining table, Prince Rudolph sits with Lisbeth Farkrens, the first Empress Alicia, and Prince Frederick, while the formal dinner stays painfully silent. The air is so thick with protocol it feels like it could snap. His eyes lock onto Frederick, and Rudolph remembers what little history says about that first prince. Just one brutal scene from Wilhelm's epic. Frederick gets assassinated early on, killed by the same tyrant Rudolph is destined to become. As that thought hits him, Empress Alicia snaps her gaze onto Rudolph and points out, like it's shocking news, that this is the first time they have ever talked face-to-face, no hesitation. And Rudolph immediately confirms it's true. She knew her words rang true, but when he snapped back to the fact that they'd met before, his face hardened instantly. In his mind, the memory slips into focus only this time. It's a much younger him, alone at last, completely swallowed by a book. His memory snapped into clarity the moment it all happened, a tea party hosted by Empress Elisha, while the other kids ran wild in the garden, and he kept himself locked away. That innocent kid's play was anything but this young prince was robbing around on a small girl's back, cracking her with a twig, and roaring for his horse to sprint even faster. While the girls sobbed and begged him to stop, Robin just grinned and hurled insults, calling her a pig from the table nearby, and Prince Frederick sat there, young and silent, watching the cruelty unfold without so much as a twitch. Robin stepped up in front of the other kids and proclaimed himself the gatekeeper to Frederick. And instantly everyone else erupted, begging for the first prince's notice, swearing they'd be his consort or his attendant. Frederick watched them swarm around him, thinking how, unlike his brother, he was being chased by so many, and then he shot back, ice cold, asking what he could possibly get out of any of them. As the kids screamed their vows to become someone's beautiful wife and someone's protector, Robin, broken and battered after the torment she'd taken, hauled herself up from the dirt, tears spilling, determination blazing, and roared that she'd finally prove she was worth keeping, even if that meant standing at his right hand. She and the other kids froze in shock, all words caught in their throats. Then Prince Frederick didn't even look up for long, snapped that there was nothing to gain from being friends with him, and said they were only interrupting his reading with that. He shut them out and walked off. His words crushed the young girl so hard she dropped to the ground in pure despair, because she couldn't wrap her head around how he could toss away chances and connections like they meant nothing, while the ones he threw out were the very things she'd only ever dared to dream about. That memory burned itself into Rudolph's mind because it finally showed him what his older brother really was, Prince Frederick, the icy, merciless rationalist who only lifted a finger if it served him. Frederick never recognized a mint, yet people once called him worthless, and that crushed him. But he decided he was different now, and just getting his brother's time felt like an honor. With a grin, he laid out his case and swore that Frederick couldn't touch his new military power because he planned to back his brother with the full backing of the Farkrent family's marquis, fully approved and all in. Prince Frederick's declaration lit up the dinner table. Everyone finally got it. He'd accepted Prince Rudolph into his faction, and that choice would flip the whole balance of power. Alicia, the very first empress, let out a breath of relief over the new alliance, and then she steered the talk straight to Rudolph's upcoming enrollment at the Imperial Academy. She even suggested Frederick, who'd once led the student council, could offer some real guidance. Rudolph, even if he felt it was just small talk, still answered politely. Frederick mattered to him as a model the students should follow. Right when the talk was about to kick off, Frederick snapped, asking if their conversation was done. Then he shot up from his seat, said he had other appointments with the nobility, and left the rest staring in stunned silence. The cold truth hit Rudolph like a punch. He'd been naive, thinking he could handle more than he ever could. Bitter clarity hit him like a punch once he'd finished the ritual to forge a friendship with the Farcurrent family. Frederick knew he didn't need to speak to him anymore. He figured he himself had no worth at all, because all that mattered were the powerful people backing him. Then a cold, humorless laugh slipped out of his mouth. Rudolph crumpled over the table, gripping his head. Stunned out of his mind, could he honestly think he'd score revenge for his old humiliation just by stealing someone else's authority? He snaps his gaze to his brother, Oscar, and a bitter smile curls onto his lips. Then he mutters, almost daring the universe to prove him wrong, asking if he's really that foolish for thinking Frederick would offer a friendly chat just because he's got heavy backing behind him. Still reeling from the sting of his brother's dismissal, he feels a gentle touch steady him. Lisbeth Farcurrent slips her hand into his, smiles with warmth, and promises, "I'm here for you." Her little act of support lights up his face, and right under that tiredness, an honest smile finally breaks through, and he thanks her, speaking her name with formal respect, Lisbeth Dono. Just when things finally feel peaceful, the first empress, Alicia, closes in, and she's got an apology lined up for Prince Rudolph because her son is too busy by him. Then she sweeps through the room like it's nothing, calling the whole meeting a staged performance, just a ritual to show off power to the other nobles. Prince Frederick strides off from the gathering with not a single glance back, telling himself that the meeting's mission is done, so now there's nothing left to demand his attention. Right when Frederick vanishes from sight, the Empress's voice slices through the air again. She suddenly calls out to Prince Rudolph, panicking like, "I almost forgot," and it shocks him out of his focus. She snaps that the payback he's getting for all his effort is nowhere near enough, because as the first Empress, she holds the cards. Then she tells him to go ahead and demand whatever he needs. With a sweeping, show-stopping gesture, she declares that starting now, they're allies, leaving Rudolph and Lisbeth. He snaps out of his shock, and a small smile crawls back onto his face. And when he accepts her generous offer, he realizes too late that he'd been picturing her a lot stricter than this. The Emperor smiles right back, and somehow it all feels like a command. Hope flares for a second, then bam, a wine glass rockets through the air, screaming past his head and narrowly dodging disaster with a razor-sharp whistle. A glass shatters against the wall as a drunken, slurred voice screams his name. His mother, Beatrice, stumbling in with a bottle clutched in her grip. She spits out that he's been hanging around way longer than usual, since she's used to seeing him show up for the Emperor's greetings and then vanish. Prince Oscar bolts to her side, pleading with her to stop, because she's had too much to drink. Her drunken fury roared on without slowing, as Prince Oscar screamed for her to shut up. Then Beatrice swung the bottle in her hand and smashed it over his head. She didn't even blink at the prince staggering back. She turned to Rudolph and tossed the first Empress aside as an ugly woman. A vicious sneer snapped onto her face, spit dribbling as she slithered into a private family chat, eyes locked on her son, pressing him for his answer. In that huge columned hall buzzing with guests, Prince Rudolph hangs back until Beatrice, his mother, strides straight up to him and pulls his attention like a magnet, leaving him staring at her with worry as he asks if she wants to talk somewhere private, just family. He tries to wave her off, insisting there's nothing to discuss, then demands why she isn't with the Emperor, only for Beatrice to smile sweetly and tell him His Majesty is busy. But more importantly, she has something she just has to say. Without another word, she shoots in from behind and locks her arms around him tight. Rudolph freezes instantly, his whole body going rigid with pure shock and confusion. He shoves her away with brutal force and snaps that he wants to know what she's doing because the thought hits him hard. She's never, not once, held him like a childhood memory. Beatrice plays it off with fake cheer, acting shocked and teasing that maybe he's just going through a rebellious phase. She kicks off her story with a shaky apology, begging him to believe she didn't mean to ignore him, and then she spills the ugly truth of her past born into nobility. She had a title but no power. Her parents botched their fortune until it vanished, and she was shoved into a life of brutal, thankless work. Everything flips when she lands a servant role in the imperial palace, and that's when she finally catches the emperor's attention, his father. She keeps going, confessing the truth she wasn't from a bloodline fit to be an emperor's official wife, and that's exactly why she snapped onto her place in the imperial house with everything she had, and not long after that she conceived him. Her voice shakes as she blurts out that every single thing she did was for his future, not hers. She admits her fear wasn't about herself at all. It was about him. If the emperor casts her aside, she panics, because it won't just be her fate on the line. Rudolph will be left behind too, with nowhere left to go. Rudolph stares at her, and the shock on his face hits like lightning. This shot crushes the room with cold certainty. He stares his emotional mother right in the eyes and, with plain words, calls it what it is, a lie. He hammers his point home, his voice shaking with old wounds, demanding answers if her story is true. Why did she shove him aside? He hits her with the truth. She always dropped everything to entertain his majesty, and the second he asked for help, she treated Rudolph like a problem to ignore. Forces her to drag up one brutal memory when she was just a kid. He'd once asked why she gave him birth, and she answered so cold it still cuts. "Isn't it obvious I had you only so I could stay in the imperial family?" Now he's demanding how she could think those words were ever meant for him. Beatrice freezes, stunned, and can't get a single reply out. Rudolph plants himself in front of his mother, Beatrice towering, furious and fuming, calling him an insolent brat and snapping that she can't believe who he takes after. Then demanding what his little act of defiance is, even for Rudolph, doesn't flinch. He just says, plain and steady, "I'm me." She waves off his confession like it's nothing, a whatever smirk on her lips, and Rudolph just stares, sweat rolling and a lone bead down his temple. Right in the middle of that tense back and forth, a brand new voice slams in. Elizabeth Farkrantz points straight at Rudolph and snaps that all this chatter about him becoming her family's adopted son-in-law has to be a total mistake. Beatrice shuts out the interruption and locks eyes on her son. Then she demands he stops and thinks, asking straight if he understands the weight of his debt to the imperial family. And she lays it on the line: if he marries into the Farkrant family, he's tossing away his prince's title. Rudolph just stares, utterly stunned by the ultimatum. Her words hit him like a punch. His eyes flare with shock and rage. And the instant the idea lands that he could owe the imperial family anything, he shuts it down in his head, remembering only the pain his position has dragged into his life. He forces a sharp breath out, fighting to keep the anger caged. He drags his breathing under control and studies the woman in front of him, piece by piece, then realizes she's just clinging to the imperial family, terrified of losing her own place, because in her mind nothing matters more than keeping him right inside that lineage. Then it hits him and boom, he erupts into uncontrollable laughter, because somehow, without even meaning to, he's chosen the best possible road for himself. Beatrice is totally thrown off by his sudden shift in mood. His sudden burst of laughter sends Beatrice into a rage. "What are you smiling about?" she snaps, slamming her wine glass onto the floor, then barking at him to wipe that smirk right off his face. Before Lisbeth can even move again, she lunges forward and plants herself between mother and son. With a sharp, formal voice, she introduces herself as the eldest daughter of House Farkrantz. And then she straight up calls Beatrice mother-in-law, asking what she thinks she's doing to her future husband. Next, Lisbeth fires back that Beatrice has shamed her house and drags her for her terrible upbringing, leaving Beatrice frozen in disbelief and burning with fury. Now the two women lock eyes, electric, tension crackles in the air. Beatrice glares through it, gripping her empty glass, while Lisbeth stands her ground, stone calm and fiercely unshaken. She stands tall before Prince Rudolph, staring down his mother, and blurts that she just wants to be with the man she loves. Rudolph backs her up, and Lisbeth snaps that she owes Beatrice zero explanation, never once even considering revenge. Beatrice turns away, a little smug smile telling herself she'll finally escape. Then the moment she takes a step, her calm snaps in half. She whips around with a furious roar, lunges forward and screams at them not to dare. Her sentence gets slammed to a stop when a glass of red liquid smashes into her face. Glass exploding, red splattering, and shards and drops flying everywhere as the nobles around her choke on shock. The truth behind the assault snaps into view. First Empress Alicia stands across the room, her arms still locked in place. Rudolph and Lisbeth freeze in shock. And Rudolph can't help but think, why would the Empress shield me? Beatrice, bleeding from a cut on her cheek, glares at Alicia with pure collapse because she sees it now. Alicia isn't a threat at all, just a hopeless woman. Empress Alicia's sharp voice slices the silence as she fires straight at Beatrice. How she never misses a chance to embarrass the imperial house the moment the emperor is on official duty, and how she always stirs up trouble. Then she cracks the command back to your chambers. Now, utterly crushed, Beatrice obeys, turns to leave and mutters, as you wish. Now that the clash is settled, Empress Alicia whips around to face the gathered guests, bows in apology for the disruption, and urges everyone to jump right back into the New Year celebration. She darts back to Rudolph and Lisbeth leans in to ask what went down, only for Rudolph to brush it off like it's just a bug buzzing past Alicia, though swallows her rage and vows in her heart that she'll never okay their marriage, and she'll crush it for good. A nearby noblewoman spots Alicia bleeding and offers a handkerchief, but the Empress snaps it away, acting like it's nothing at all. A worried noblewoman insists it's not nothing, but Alicia just lets out a sigh like, sure, young people always love to make everything sound worse than it is. Her gaze snaps over as the noblewoman blurts Prince Rudolph's name, pointing at the blood running down him too, and she lunges toward his forehead to check the wound, swearing those glass shards must have ricocheted straight at him. Reacting to his injury, Beatrice, his mother, explodes in alarm, screaming for someone to haul him straight to the infirmary, warning that if that wound turns infected, the fallout will be catastrophic. She chooses to treat the wound herself, telling him to hold still as she wraps a bandage around his head, and she even apologizes for what she did earlier, saying this dressing should be enough for now, while Empress Alicia and Lisbeth keep their distance and watch. Now that the prince is bandaged and sitting beside Lisbeth, Empress Alicia storms closer and warns him to be careful because that wound might swell again later. He tilts his head up at the Empress, totally baffled, and then he demands to know, right to her face, why she'd ever shield someone like him. Her face darkens, and a shadow swallows her eyes as Lisbeth watches, worry tightening her chest because the Empress finally spills her true motive with terrifying clarity. She can't stand that woman, Beatrice. First, Empress Alicia lays it all out, this empire, this imperial palace. They're her whole world, even if the emperor never gives her affection. She's poured her life into the empire, understands he has to produce capable heirs, and so she doesn't fight him when he takes Lady Katerina as his second empress. Her calm demeanor snaps in half as fury floods back. She remembers Beatrice, Rudolph's mother, storming into the palace like she owned the place, smashing through everything with filthy feet and laughing the whole time. That memory burns in her chest and drives her confession to Prince Rudolph. She lays it all out, saying Beatrice didn't just ruin someone. She desecrated the imperial palace itself, the place she cherished like her own child. And it all traces back to the venom she carried for his mother. By the end, she finally admits the truth. Hatred swallowed her, and she neglected him. Satan stared at him with shocking honesty and told him he wasn't just anyone. He was her beloved child and part of the imperial family. Then her body moved on its own to shield him, and she explained that the injury she'd gotten while protecting her kid didn't hurt or scare her at all, leaving Rudolph completely speechless. While he's trying to digest every word she just said, she keeps going, admitting her confession must feel horribly late to him, then spirals into doubt, insisting she must have missed something simple, like there's something wrong with her. Regret hits her like a wave as she faces him, and she can't stop lamenting. If only he'd stayed locked on self-interest and never lost that drive, she wouldn't be sitting in this pain right now. Her words hit the prince like a thunderclap. His eyes flood with tears as he finally senses a warmth from her that he never once got from his own mother. And overwhelmed, he blurts out his thanks. The emotional tension finally softens when Alicia's face lights up. She rushes out an apology for dragging Rudolph and Lisbeth into dealing with a troublesome old woman, then practically pushes them to go enjoy the party. They listened to her and dove straight into the festivities inside the grand hall. Couples whirled on the dance floor while Rudolph drew haunting melodies from his cello, and Lisbeth struck the piano right beside him, forming a tiny ensemble that kept the whole room alive for the guests. When the music and dancing finally fade out, a carriage rattles up a steep hill beneath the night sky, closing in on a looming dark manor, the place where the evening is headed. She couldn't believe her eyes. Empress Alicia's unexpected side was right there in the carriage, and Prince Rudolph didn't even argue, he just nodded along. He said it was a huge relief. Sure, the Empress would step in and smooth things out later. Then his eyes snapped away, and the thought of Lisbeth kept chasing him. Spotting his hesitation, she blurted out her worry and brought up Beatrice. And before she could spiral, Rudolph snapped in fast, telling her there was no reason to dress his mother up with honorifics. She let out a frustrated sigh, hurling accusations the second his mother was gone, claiming his mother still strutted around like she owned the world, and acting with brutal arrogance until he snapped back, saying sure, she was his mother, but she was still a terrible woman. Her face hardened as she slipped in a new angle, insisting Beatrice's moves weren't accidents at all. They were deliberate. The prince froze at the thought, and she practically shook him into taking it seriously and weighing every detail. She started laying out her logic. If Beatrice was going to stay in the imperial palace, she needed two things: the fourth prince backing her, and the emperor's favor warming her corner. Lisbeth leaned into it and admitted that today's visit wasn't random. It was a calculated play to crank up pressure over the very first requirement and keep him locked in his spot, and Rudolph just murmured back that her read was dead on. He stayed totally confused, insisting that if she really cared about her place in the palace, her recent actions made zero sense. Lisbeth bought his logic, then shot back. Why would someone who's determined to stay in the palace gamble it all just to get thrown out? Those wild, reckless moves, she knew, would drain even the emperor's patience to the bone. That twist hit her like a brick to the chest. His mother's actions didn't match her good intentions at all, and it almost felt like she was setting it up so Beatrice would get tossed aside by the emperor, until the prince froze, stunned by the sheer impact of what that meant. He's still stunned by what he just learned about his mother, but Lisbeth stays cool and lays it out. Beatrice's choices only look weird to someone careless, because he actually thinks straight, while a fool would have just tossed reason aside and acted on pure impulse. As she keeps talking, she tells him straight up, once they're married, his mom won't be allowed anywhere near the palace, so Beatrice's whole scheme just collapses in their face. When she drops that declaration, Rudolph sputters in pure shock, blurting that she's talking about distant plans when he hasn't even enrolled in the academy yet, and Lisbeth, unshaken, shoots back that the wedding will happen right after his graduation, because time will fly before they even notice. As their carriage rattles beneath a sea of stars, the debate keeps blazing. Lisbeth is already dreaming up a massive celebration and wants Maya to start taking his measurements. But Rudolph slams back that they're rushing it and insists his school uniform comes first. The story snaps into a shadowy, ornate hallway, and the voice murmurs that Rudolph has thrown in his lot with the Frederick faction. Now he's setting his sights on the Imperial Academy. The voice turns out to belong to a young man with long, dark hair, lounging in a chair like he owns the place, as he tells the Sauvalier's son it's finally time for him to start moving too. Then he shoos the maid, who's just finished, only for her to burst out in sheer terror, sobbing and begging him for mercy. Unbothered, Wilhelm Sama calmly tells her the last dose is fading fast, and as the maid grips her head in panic, he reaches for a tiny vial of liquid, murmuring an apology for almost forgetting. He barks at the maid to open her mouth and takes control of the dose, and she gratefully swallows it proudly, whispering that living and dying for him is her greatest joy, while he watches, smugly pleased, just as a knock rattles the door. An older steward barges in, breathless and apologizing for the interruption, then blurts out whether anything went wrong at the celebration, like he didn't just walk into the chaos, while Wilhelm calmly reassures him that everything's fine. The Sauvalier family's second son presses an older man for answers, making sure nobody even suspects that his father, Yellen, is dead. Yet the man just stares back, grim and unshakable, and answers with one cold word: none. A cruel, toothy grin splits across the Sauvalier's son's face as he snaps an order. Claude, keep the scam going and become his father's double. Claude bows his head, and even with his young lord watching, accepts it. Once the talk ends, he whips around and strides toward the balcony, his coat snapping in the night wind, and he mentally repeats one thing: he has to get back to the academy by tomorrow. He leans over the balcony as the full moon lights up the city below, gripping an ornate little vial in his gloved hand. Then his grin snaps back even wider, turning colder as he vows to destroy the entire nation. On the way to the Imperial Academy, Lisbeth breaks down in tears, freaking out that she and Rudolph are about to be split up in those gender-segregated dorms, and Maya snaps at her, reminding her she's supposed to call the prince by his nickname, while some other girl watches Maya get all flustered and goes, "Wow, you're adorable." And Maya fires back that everyone has to address each other with affection. Maya's teasing hits like a spark. Rudolph and Lisbeth both flush hard, cheeks burning as they shyly say each other's nicknames. Rudy and Liz, and seeing them like that, Mai can't stop herself from thinking how crazy adorable they are. It's a reminder back when their uniforms were stitched, they all swore to use nicknames so they'd feel like real classmates the moment they stepped into the academy. 3 months vanished in a blink, and now they're riding in their carriage, headed straight for the entrance ceremony. Inside the carriage, Maya's teasing keeps rolling until Lisbeth's personal attendant, a Farkrent family intel agent, suddenly drops into view from the doorframe and tells Maya with a wink to quit messing with her employers. Lisbeth, grinning with amusement, egged on Maya's unhinged outburst even more, then just shot a nervous laugh, trying to keep up with the chaos. Their cozy, lighthearted vibe gets yanked away when the carriage suddenly halts and the rider, who's been checking things out, reports that traffic is totally frozen about 3 kilometers up. The shock hits everyone at once. Then they learn the horse in the carriage ahead caught a stone, stumbled, and blew out its leg right there on the road, and the group's stomach drops as they realize, in horror, they're not going to reach the entrance ceremony on time. Rudolph lets out a tired sigh and snaps that, since they're royal, they can't show up late. Then he calmly says running would get them there quickest, and Lisbeth immediately nods and agrees. He grabs Lisbeth's hand, and they burst out of the carriage, telling Maya they'll meet again later, while the two sprint away, and he can't help but stare at how wildly different Lisbeth gets when she's around the prince. He tore off at a sprint, charging past the long line of stopped carriages fueled by one goal: get to the academy. He and Lisbeth sprinted down the academy's corridors, their fresh uniforms snapping crisp as they tore past other students, including the Sauvelier family's second son, who eyed them with a calm, icy stare. The Imperial Academy's spire-topped main hall rose straight ahead, and Rudolph's face tightened with grim determination as he stared at the sight of. Inside the grand hall, the entrance ceremony was already in full swing. Rows of fresh-faced students sat shoulder to shoulder, roses in hand, staring straight at the instructors on the dais in eerie, silent focus. They slid into their spots among the new kids just before anyone noticed, disappearing into the sea of uniformed teenagers. As soon as the ceremony wrapped up, the students poured out and streamed through the sunlit stone archways of the academy grounds. Next, the students were herded to their homeroom, and that's when the big, intimidating instructor Boris Armian stepped in and introduced himself as their teacher for the next 3 years, announcing they'd kick off with introductions one by one. Starting from a marked seat, first up was a girl named April Svensson, and as she spoke, Lisbeth leaned close to Rudolph and hissed that she was terrified and absolutely awful at public speaking. Right behind her, another student stepped forward with a dazzling grin. She introduced herself as Sheila, the eldest daughter of the Anderson Frontier Marquis family, and asked everyone, sweet as sugar, to treat her kindly. Her charming smile and striking figure instantly stole the attention of every guy in the class. The name Anderson hit Lisbeth like lightning. She jerked in her seat and suddenly knew Sheila was Prince Robin's old fiancé. Pure shock made her fall hard backward out of her chair with a thunderous crash, and their teacher barked at her to knock it off. She hurried to calm her outburst in front of a worried Rudolph, stammering that she wasn't staring for any weird reason. She just recognized Sheila as Robin's ex-fiancée, yet Rudolph's focus snapped away the second he realized it was finally his turn to talk. He stood tall, pressed a hand to his heart, and spoke in a steady voice. "I'm Rudolph First Baldyke." The moment the name hit, the whole classroom erupted: shock, contempt, curiosity, and sharp little calculations all flying at once. He swept his eyes across the room and found his classmates weren't nearly as hostile as he'd feared. He'd braced for a storm of icy stares, but all he got was this weird, muted silence. His eyes locked onto one student in particular, April Svensson, who beamed at him with pure, no-strings-attached delight. When the teacher shouted the next name, Lisbeth shot up from her seat, started her introduction name first, then the bombshell that she was the Farkrant family's eldest daughter, and Rudolph whipped his head toward her, stunned. She shot up and dropped a jaw-dropping bombshell on the whole class. I'm Lisbeth, and I'm Prince Rudolph's fiancée. Then she locked eyes with everyone and dared them, if they had thoughts about the prince, they'd better come straight to her. The whole room froze stunned silence, swallowing every word. As the rest of the class reeled from the announcement, Sheila just leaned into the moment with a calm, knowing smile. Later, as Rudolph strode across the academy grounds, his mind kept drifting back to Sheila. Her nerve, her calm, the first woman since Maya, who didn't flinch at him. Lisbeth warned him not to draw too much attention. But Rudolph shut that down fast, insisting a killer first impression mattered. Right then, Sheila burst into view with a shining smile, greeted Prince Rudolph and Lisbeth, and told them it was an honor to be in their class, then admitted she'd been praying for a chance to talk to them. She offered her tea like it was a peace treaty, but Lisbeth softly turned it down and reminded her that they still had to unpack back at the dormitories. When Rudolph shouted her name, Sheila exploded with joy. "You remembered my name," she cried, lunging in to cup the prince's blushing face in her hands. The sudden closeness left Rudolph reeling, while Lisbeth just stood there, frozen, burning with silent rage. He shoved her away in an instant and snapped for her to stop, accusing her of playing things too carefully, like her tricks could hook some other guy. But not him, because his heart was already locked on Liz. Then he saw right through her act, called out her real plan, and warned her she'd have to drag someone else into it. As the students peel away, April Svensson stands there by herself, her face impossible to read, while the Sauvalier's son trudges beside Lisbeth, cheeks burning because he's convinced he just said something mortifying. From the raised walkway, Lisbeth swings her smile toward him, waves him off, and promises she'll see him again tomorrow. Her bright smile drops out of nowhere, TCH, and she snaps a finger to her lips, eyes flashing with sharp, calculated intent, like she's showing you the dark secret she's been hiding. At the Imperial Academy, the student dorms get split up like night and day, while a massive, lavish mansion-style building hoards the Imperial family's kids and the high-ranking nobility. The stark contrast lower dorm meant for lower-ranking nobles looks way humbler and way older than anything Prince Rudolph expected. So when he storms in with a box, he grunts because the place is ancient beyond his imagination. The moment he's there, the whole place erupts into whispers. Then two other students bolt toward him, faces full of shock. One of them, the Sauvalier family's son, snaps that he wants answers. Why is Prince Rudolph in this dorm when every other Imperial family member stays in the fancy luxury building? Rudolph stays calm and just shrugs that he decided to sleep here. He keeps a faint smile and admits it. Of course he's not welcome in the other dorm, but then he spills the real reason this place is closer to the academy, and more importantly, Robin and Wilhelm's descendant are staying right here. Dormmates stare in disbelief as the blonde student leaps around, ripping into the dorm's misery, sinking floors that groan, shabby beds that sag, and meals that taste awful, and he can't believe a prince from the Imperial family would ever survive it. Even just talking about it feels soul-crushing. Then the blonde student drops the worst bomb: no servants allowed, so they've got to fight the bugs themselves right on cue. The Sauvalier's son and a bespectacled third student burst into panic and start screaming and flailing over some tiny spider, while the blonde student snaps at Rudolph for messing up the whole situation. When their panic hits, Rudolph just calmly scoops the spider into his hands, leaving everyone stunned. Then he strides to the window and quietly lets it go outside, telling them he used to deal with stuff like this as an ordinary villager before his reincarnation, while the other boys stand there completely dumbfounded. Their awe snaps into desperate hope. Three students bow hard and beg him to be their big brother, promising he'll take care of the pest ruining their rooms: a centipede and a cockroach. Rudolph shuts them down flat, refusing. But for Prince Rudolph, who's never been trusted by anyone, this sincere plea lights up a strange, warm joy inside him, and he can't hold it back. He blushes, nods, and agrees to help them as soon as he's done unpacking, and his brand new dorm mates throw a full-on celebration, and their grateful cries of thanks ring through the dorm. "Big brother!" So Rudolph sputters, shouts back, and demands they stop calling him that. Startled by his maid, Maya towers over him with a shaky grin and demands, "What on earth are you doing?" A scene finally spills the truth under a blazing full moon. She climbed a huge tree and hauled herself up to the second-story window. Inside, he snaps that the boys' dorm is off-limits to women, so she's forced to pull stunts like this. She fires back that she wants to ask him the exact same thing, eyes blazing, even as he tries to handle bugs for his new dorm mates. Later, he's seated in the garden with Lisbeth and Maya, and the moment the others fade out, the vibe turns heavy fast. He brings up the Anderson family, grills them for their take, and points to the wild card behind everything. The most likely reason for the chaos is that his brother, Prince Robin, just broke off his engagement. He keeps digging into his analysis, saying the fault is squarely on Robin's, but the Anderson family probably blames Rudolph, the fight he's caught with him, and thinks it all stems from that. Then he claims the woman he's linked to didn't come in peace at all. She approached him because resentment burned hot, hunting revenge. He locks in on what sounds like the most logical answer, but the look on his face screams, "I'm not fully sure." Lisbeth then blurts out that she'll wipe away any little bugs clinging to him, and she quietly tells him not to stir up too much trouble while he just stands there, spaced out in his thoughts, shocked that a guy hunting revenge would go about it in such a half-done, barely trying way. The mind snaps into action, zeroing in on what happens next right now. He lays out the plan, locks in the details servants are totally allowed in the girls' dorm, then orders Maya to keep guarding Lisbeth while he gets reassigned to watch him and snaps a sharp salute as he accepts the command. Lisbeth snaps right back, demanding to know who's going to keep watch over him in the lower dorm where servants aren't allowed. But he reassures her, shrugging off Sheila's threat, then flips the plan on the spot. He's going to monitor the Wilhelm descendant in the luxury dorm and report anything that looks suspicious. Then he flashes a warm smile and says, what really matters, he just wants to share a calm, happy school life with Lisbeth. And his heartfelt words leave Lisbeth and Maya blushing hard, totally stunned for a moment. His academy life finally kicked off, and that massive school rose high against the bright, clear sky like it owned the horizon. It hit him like a whirlwind, wild new experiences, messy chaos at the dining hall, loud bursts of fun across the grounds, and then those calm, focused classroom hours where he finally meshed with his new peers. Before long, homeroom teacher Boris Armin herded the boys into the courtyard, eyes hard and voice sharp as he announced they were about to jump into a hands-on practical lesson. The blonde student said the boys' lesson was swordsmanship, and the Sauvalier's son puffed his chest like a hero, claiming he'd never lose to his big brother because he came from a knightly family, until the blonde student snapped and told him to quit using that nickname immediately. Then the teacher broke down the lesson plan, starting with a showdown. The new kids would spar against the upperclassmen swordsmen, and the teacher made it clear to brace for a brutal jump in skill. Rudolph clocked the plan in an instant, shoved those arrogant first years down, and make them watch advanced techniques take shape against a monster opponent. But when the Sauvalier's son got the message, his face drained of color because terror hit him hard. He was about to die. Right when he was trying to figure out who his opponent would be, a familiar voice cut in and called his name, Prince Oscar. Oscar congratulated him on enrolling, laughed that it's been ages since that party, then grinned and told him, I'm Rudolph's opponent, so go easy on me, okay? His classmates went speechless and started whispering that Oscar was the academy's top swordsman, towering over everyone with a heavy blade. The Sauvalier's son moaned that his big brother was finished, but Rudolph couldn't help feeling curious. It dragged him back to his own training year with Marquis Farkrantz. Now they stood across from each other with practiced swords, and Rudolph braced himself, determined to find out just how far his steel could push against Oscar's. Meanwhile, the academy split everyone by gender for practical lessons. Boys hit the training grounds for swordsmanship, while the girls were herded into a different classroom to sew, and each one was told to embroider from the same set of provided patterns. Lee Spitz said it all came down to this: she'd been split from Rudolph, then thrown into sewing and hard labor, and somehow she still stayed fiercely badass. Lisbeth snapped out of her thoughts when April Svensson rolled up to her desk with a bright smile, asked if she could sit nearby, and even though Lisbeth felt wary, she let her in. As she finally settled in, April's eyes snapped to the handkerchief Lisbeth was stitching, and with a wistful sigh, she quietly wished she had a fiancé like that, watching the way Lisbeth and the prince seemed so close. Then jealousy hit hard as she asked if the handkerchief was meant for him. April's sweet smile shattered like glass the second she asked Lisbeth why she didn't have a fiancé. Then it all clicked for Lisbeth. This wasn't friendly curiosity. It was revenge with bite. And the target wasn't Rudolph at all. Horror flooded her as April closed in, face looming, voice dripping with pure malice. It's you, Lisbeth. At the Imperial Academy, April Svensson keeps a sharp eye on Lisbeth Farkrantz and then realizes the latest schemes aren't targeting Rudolph at all. They're aimed straight at Lisbeth. Lisbeth just sits there, thinking that being spotted with Prince Robin twice has made her engagement's annulment feel like a foregone conclusion. And when she catches April's face turning grim, April snaps, "Hey, don't look so down." She blurts out that it was all just a joke, swearing to Lisbeth without any doubt that Prince Robin couldn't possibly have real feelings for her, and Lisbeth whips around, eyes widening with shock. That surprise fades, and she falls into quiet thoughts, staring across the almost empty classroom, while she silently thanks that man for shattering her way out of that engagement. Anderson Domain was the Western Border's lifeline for trade and defense, and as its head, she'd never once felt the need to get involved with the Imperial Palace. Meeting Prince Robin again only made her feel it harder. She remembered him at that dinner party, crude, boorish, and everyone around him instantly sniffed the arrogance like it was rotten. Even Sheila, right there in the room, looked fed up with how useless he was. Disdain spread through him toward his own kind. In a flashback, a crude noble heiress, rude as can be, offers herself to marry a country girl, and Lisbeth snaps rage surges as she slams her fist on the table and barks that he's the absolute lowest scum for calling himself a frontier noble. Then she declares the truth like a verdict. Only the 10 great families have the right to wear that title. The fallout from that clash was brutal. April even remembers hearing that Prince Robin smashed the guy hard, and she'll admit it, that news hit her in the best possible way. In the quiet classroom, she whips her attention back to Lisbeth and pours out her heartfelt thanks for everything that happened that day. Her friend's gratitude hits Lisbeth like a spark, and a shy blush blooms across her cheeks as she jerks her gaze away, completely flustered. By the time it was over, Elliot had snatched a win in their second year, and that triumph lit the fuse for everything that was coming next. The Imperial Academy's training grounds. An instructor blasts the whistle and the match kicks off. First year, Prince Rudolph versus second year, Prince Oscar. Rudolph freezes at the summons, but his older brother Oscar just flashes a calm, knowing smile. On the sidelines, the other students start buzzing like it's a live wire thrilled for the royal duel. One kid practically swears that nobody in their right mind would bet against the dreaded Emperor Rudolph, calling his defeat instant. Right beside him, a blonde student tightens his fist, jaw clenched, dread crawling in as worry over his own anarchy. He and Oscar square up and start fencing with swords in hand, and Rudolph goes first, confessing he's been dying to spar with Oscar for ages, ever since they never got the chance to talk at the New Year's party. Oscar gives a small, guilty smile, apologizing for turning down that invitation back then his voice hardens as he fires a sharp question. Does Rudolph really not care about teaming up with their older brother's faction? Before Rudolph can even speak, the two princes snap into battle stances, and the air tightens like a wire. Rudolph rockets ahead, crashing into the duel with a brutal overhead smash. But Oscar bats the strike A-side with zero trouble, clocking the shallow lunge as a feint. Then he pounces, driving Rudolph backward and trapping him in a furious storm of counterattacks. The older prince keeps hammering forward, praising Rudolph's sword skill and nailing the fact that he learned from the Farkrant family, then snaps that Rudolph's inexperience shows the moment tougher enemies step in. Rudolph clenches his teeth, and Oscar watches like a hawk, ready for him to go for broke with a full-on assault the second he feels trapped. The crowd is left gaping at the spectacle. One student can't stop praising Prince Rudolph's skill, but another snaps back that he's not fighting for show. He's up against Prince Oscar, the strongest fighter in second year. And the blonde student watches with wide eyes as that concern for his brother hits him hard. Hidden from the crowd below, April Svensson leans at a nearby window and watches the whole confrontation unfold. As April Svensson watched the duel rage on, she swung her gaze to Lisbeth Farkrantz, perched on the railing for the best view in the world, and when April pointed out that Prince Rudolph was sparring with Prince Oscar, she asked if Lisbeth wasn't worried. Lisbeth just nodded, dead certain. Then she slammed her decision into place with rock-solid confidence. No part of her believed Rudolph could lose, and with that nailed down, she declared she was done with distractions and heading straight back to her embroidery. April's devotion made her swoon in a dreamy breath, and she couldn't help gushing about just how deeply Lisbeth loved the prince, while Lisbeth just stammered a flustered little sound, overwhelmed because that kind of affection felt almost unbearable. Then she leaned in with a mischievous spark in her eye and admitted she'd even thought about borrowing Rudolph as a prank at first, but the moment she said her name was actually on the official list of his possible fiancés. Lisbeth felt like she'd been hit in the chest, instantly frozen in horror. April snapped Lisbeth out of her shock, insisting she had zero intention of pulling that stunt, especially after the prince made it painfully clear he wasn't interested in her at all. Just then, Sheila slid into view behind them, April still seething and muttering that she couldn't stand Sheila, while Sheila stayed totally unfazed and cheerfully said, "Come on, let's try to get along." Her eyes snapped to Lisbeth's handiwork. She held up the embroidery hoop, and inside it was a tangled, chaotic mess of thread. Sheila pressed, "Is that supposed to be Prince Rudolph?" And Lisbeth, shaking with nerves, admitted it was. That question shoved Lisbeth into a full-on spiral of despair. She gripped the hoop, broke down in tears, and cursed herself for being clumsy, not ladylike, and absolutely not cute at all, while April watched in panic and shouted her name. Sheila didn't buy the drama. She went full practical mode, calmly laying out detailed advice and insisting Lisbeth's design was just too complicated. She told her to stick to a simpler motif, pull the fabric tight, and nail the basics first. And her patient guidance left Lisbeth staring, stunned into silence. With eyes wide, Lisbeth begged Sheila to teach her more, and Sheila said yes, even while warning that her own mother or Maya would probably be the better teachers. Fire back in her chest, Lisbeth vowed she'd give it everything then. Right in the rush of her excitement, her hand slipped. She shoved a needle too far, and April snapped into a terrified gasp. She'd finished it tight in the embroidery hoop, set a completed masterpiece. A sweet scene of a dark-haired girl and a light-haired boy holding hands, all wrapped in sparkly stitches that practically glittered. April exploded into a joyful hug, snatching Lisbeth up in her arms as she shouted that her very first embroidery had come out stunningly perfect, while Sheila stood nearby, smiling softly as she watched it all unfold. Right when victory finally sank in, Lisbeth snapped her gaze to the front of the classroom where the sewing teacher stood, and she shouted to Sheila. She strode right up to her, dropped a heartfelt apology for her earlier rudeness, and thanked her for the help she'd given. Lisbeth put her feelings on the table with a sincere, hopeful expression, then slid in a heartfelt request. Starting now, could they please work things out and get along? Sheila's sweet act disappeared in a blink. Her eyes went wide, shock crashing in, then turned into a brutal glare as she snapped at Lisbeth, demanding to know whether she even understood what she was asking and how many times she'd have to repeat herself. Right before the tense confrontation could spiral out of control, a thunderous shout tore through the air. "Stop!" The story slams us into a training yard under a sky full of stars. Two young men crouch in a deadly standoff, their wooden practice swords jammed tight against each other's throats, neither one backing down. They stay locked in a deadlock, sweat pouring off their faces as they gasp for breath. Neither one can land the upper hand. The instructor, dark goatee and all, stares down at the sparring princes, then slams the moment shut and shouts that time's up, forcing the students to freeze and stare, while the Sauvalier's son, the bespectacled blonde kid, just sits in tense silence, waiting for the official verdict. Bellows rings out across the training grounds, an ugly draw. The students' crowd explodes, half of them screaming they can't believe it, and one guy rants that this ruins his bet, demanding to know how Prince Oscar could pull off only a draw. The crowd roars, and Prince Oscar slumps against his training like he's finally breathing again. Then the blonde student barrels up to him, fired with concern, asking if he's okay. Oscar steadies himself and insists he fought like a warrior. Sure, he didn't win the bout, but he still went out swinging. Oscar knows the truth. Sweat drips down his brow as he thinks, this can't be real. He was supposed to lose, but he still can't reach his brother, Rudolph. Then Rudolph strides up, wipes his face with a cloth, and grins, praising Oscar's strength while admitting his nerves spiked when Oscar charged him with real intent. Even after being told to go easy, he reaches out, tells Oscar he can't wait to have him as a brother, and leaves Oscar frozen, staring like he can't find the word. Thanks, Oscar, because Rudolph just made it clear his brother is the kind of guy whose real power you can't even measure. He explains that if he pushed the situation to where Oscar took the lead, it would have wrecked his brother's reputation. So yeah, a draw was the only outcome that didn't blow everything up. Right as he starts talking, a bunch of tough trainees barge in. One blurts out that Prince Rudolph's performance was incredible, and another swears they couldn't beat Prince Oscar, not even if they tried, let alone force a draw. Oscar just stands there, utterly baffled by their sudden show of respect. Then the trainees bow so deeply, they move like one, every head dropping in perfect unison. Their leader rises and formally apologizes for their earlier rudeness, admitting they never realized Prince Rudolph had that kind of insane talent. Oscar just stares, completely rocked, because the attitude shift is so sudden it feels unreal. He finally gets it. Rudolph wasn't trying to drag Oscar down with that draw at all. He just engineered the whole thing so his own name would explode upward. Oscar's reputation stays rock solid, while Rudolph shoots through the roof. The blonde student tells Oscar, "Everything turned out exactly like I said it would." And when Rudolph hears it, he snaps around with a smug little grin, then nudges his brother like, "Right." He's thrown into the spotlight in a huge ornate hall when a pack of students circles him, and a flustered girl with glasses blurts that, with his reputation, he could get himself made a student council officer in no time. Her words ricochet through the room and slam him totally off guard. Right before he can even process it, a dark-haired kid lounging on the desk casually greets him, and then a spiky blonde classmate snaps at him for having his feet on the furniture. Rudolph just stands there stunned, realizing he's been cornered into joining the student council. The one mess he was trying his hardest to dodge, because he knows it'll drag even more unwanted attention straight to him. The blonde student tells him to loosen up, and the dark-haired one shrugs that he's already been marked to be the next student council president. The glasses girl cuts in, saying that spot is always reserved for someone from the imperial family, and then another girl adds she'd be thrilled if he joined, no matter what it takes. By the time it's all laid out, Rudolph is left completely stunned. The second girl keeps going, saying Prince Robin is absolutely not right for the job. Then Rudolph's mind flashes with Robin's smug, arrogant face, and he silently nods along. The blonde student bursts in immediately, yelling that Robin is totally out of the question. He explains that Rudolph's behavior has finally turned around, and more than that, he's got skills every bit as sharp as Prince Oscar's. With that in hand, he shuts down any objections and declares the appointment is set. Rudolph says nothing, quietly backing the council's united front. The dark-haired student zeroes in and asks what's wrong, hitting the nail on the head when she guesses Rudolph thinks he's just being used to connect to Prince Oscar's faction. Rudolph keeps it locked in his mind, confirms it for himself, and hardens his resolve he's not joining. Leaning in so close, the student hisses the political truth. This would be a disaster if someone from Prince Frederick's faction, the one that's friendly with Oscar, walks in. He then fires back the student council's unwritten rule at Rudolph, no faction wars allowed. Then he drops the bombshell. His older brother was president last year. He ran as vice president, and they crushed it as a team, with Rudolph hanging on every word as the student's case hits him like a ton of bricks. Just when it feels like everything's finally settled, formal introductions kick off. Crystal Svensson, the bespectacled accountant, steps up to say her name, and then a jittery blonde student barrels in shouting that he's D-Lick McGregor and he's in charge of general affairs. A pair of shining shoes strides ahead with iron focus, planting a bold step into a brand new role he never saw coming. In the student council room, Prince Rudolph sits there with the others, tapping his patience thin, while Crystal Swinson mutters that the class is dragging on and asks where the vice president has vanished to. Rudolph can't stand it. He only wants to dash in, give a quick greeting, and bolt out because Lisbeth is waiting for him back in the classroom. Right as he's lost in his thoughts, the heavy door to the room creaks open like something's about to break in. A young guy with reddish-brown hair bursts in, brimming with confidence, clutching a briefcase stuffed with documents. Then his grip slips and it slams onto the polished floor with a brutal clatter. Crystal's breath catches the moment he shows up. She blurts, "Wilhelm Sama," and demands why he's here, because it's already too late. When Rudolph hears that name, his eyes go wide and Crystal panics, snaps into an apology, and introduces the prince the proper way. Wilhelm, fresh off the scene, shrugs off her nerves and smiles through the awkwardness. Then he kicks off introductions, proudly calling the young dark-haired boy the Duke's Crier's son, before finishing with, And I'm Wilhelm von Sovelier, the student council president. His eyes lock onto Rudolph, and that smug smile spreads across his face. Then he greets the fourth prince like an old friend, welcoming him to the student council and practically promising this is going to be fun.